First letter. A small-town romance about second chances. February 1st. Book 2. By Valentine. Copyright 2026 by Valentine. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced in any form or by any electronic or mechanical means, including information storage and retrieval systems, without written permission from the author, except for the use of brief quotations in a book review. Defined with vellum. Chapter 1. Isley Martin did not like surprises. In fact, she actively cultivated a life void of them. She liked order. She liked the way a fresh stack of cream-colored parchment lined up perfectly on the shelf, edges flush. She liked the rhythmic scritch-scratch of a nib testing new ink on gummed paper. She liked the smell of her shop, lavender, dust, and the vanilla scent of aging cellulose, because it was the smell of history, and history, usually, stayed put. It was safe. It was documented. It was done. But this particular afternoon, history had decided to be rude. Isley stood in the back storage room of the written word, staring at the jagged hole in the plaster behind the radiator. She had only meant to retrieve a dropped pen cap. Instead, she had nudged a loose baseboard, which had crumbled like a stale biscuit to reveal a dark, cool cavity between the studs. And inside the cavity, wrapped in oilcloth that had long since grown brittle and tacky, was a bundle of letters. They were currently vibrating in her hand, or maybe her hands were vibrating. It was hard to tell. Isley took a shaky breath, inhaling the dry, chalky scent of pulverized plaster. It coated her tongue, gritty and ancient. She looked down at her favorite wool cardigan, oatmeal-colored, vintage, safe, now dusted with a fine white mist of debris. Cautiously, as if the paper might bite, she lifted the top envelope. The paper was heavy, textured vellum, yellowed with age but surprisingly intact. The red wax seal on the back was cracked but legible. A shield, a rose, a quill. To my dearest Eleanor. The handwriting was unmistakable. Large, looping, confident strokes that she had seen 1,000 times in the town museum, on plaques, on the bronze statue standing in the town square. Elias Thorne, the founder. The man whose legendary fairy tale romance with his wife Margaret was the engine that kept the entire town of Valentine's Verge employed. Their love story was the main export. It was why tourists flocked here in February to buy heart-shaped soaps and love potion lattes. It was why Isley could afford to sell hand-dipped stationery in the age of email. But his wife's name hadn't been Eleanor. Isley felt a cold draft snake around her ankles, crawling up her tights. It wasn't just the hole in the wall. It was the feeling of a foundation shifting, the earth beneath the shop tilting on its axis. "Okay," she whispered to the empty shop. Her voice sounded thin, swallowed by the rows of paper and leather-bound journals. "Okay, logic. Breathe." She looked at Hemingway, the shop cat, a massive orange tabby who was currently grooming his tail on the counter with aggressive indifference. He paused, one leg in the air, gave her a judgmental squint, and resumed cleaning. "This is historical," she told him, trying to convince herself. "It doesn't have to be a disaster. People had complex lives in the 1890s. Maybe Eleanor was a cousin, a very dear cousin." Her fingers trembled as she slid the letter out. The paper rustled, a sound like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "My dearest Eleanor, the wedding is set for Tuesday. Margaret is ecstatic. The town is ecstatic. And I am utterly undone. Every bell that rings for this union sounds to me like a funeral toll. I am selling my soul for this valley, Eleanor. But know that while I give my name to her and my labor to this land, my heart remains yours. It is a lie I must live so that you may live safely. Isley lowered the letter. The air in the shop seemed to suck out of the room. Not a cousin, she squeaked. This wasn't just a letter. It was a bomb. If Elias Thorne, the saint of romance, the poster boy for true love conquers all, had married Margaret for money while loving someone else, the town's brand wasn't just tarnished, it was fraudulent. The town of love was built on a marriage of convenience. She imagined Mrs. Gable's face if she knew. She imagined the city council, the tourists. Ding, ding. The brass bell above the shop door chimed, sharp and cheerful. Isley jumped so hard she nearly dropped the bundle. She swiveled around, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Instinct took over. She shoved the letters behind her back, clutching them so tightly the edges dug into her palms. "We're closed," she called out, her voice cracking in the middle. "Inventory, hazardous dust, very toxic. Go away." Door was unlocked. The voice was deep, amused, and sounded like gravel tumbling in a dryer. It rippled through the quiet shop, disturbing the peace more effectively than the plaster dust. A man stepped out of the shadows of the vestibule and into the warm, golden light of the shop. He brought the cold with him. A gust of biting January wind that ruffled the displays of handmade greeting cards. Flynn Hawthorne. Isley's stomach did a traitorous little flip, a sensation she immediately resented. She knew him, of course. Everyone in town knew him. He was the podcast guy. He drifted into town 3 weeks ago, renting the loft above the bakery, ostensibly to do a nice fluffy piece on small-town revivals. But Isley was a listener. She knew cold truth. She knew Flynn Hawthorne didn't do revivals. He did exposés. He dug up skeletons, wired them for sound, and made them dance for ad revenue. He was a shark in a fishbowl, and right now, he was swimming in her shop. He was also, objectively, devastating. He was wearing a battered leather jacket that looked like it smelled of trouble, rain, and cheap motel coffee. His hair was dark and perpetually messy, as if he'd just run his hands through it in frustration, a gesture she had seen him do twice across the street at the cafe. And his eyes were sharp, gray, and predatory. He was looking right at her. "Inventory?" he asked, raising a skeptical eyebrow. He took a few steps into the shop, his heavy boots loud on the hardwood floor. Thud. Thud. "You inventory the wall cavities often?" He gestured to the pile of plaster rubble at her feet with a nod of his chin. "Structural maintenance," Isley lied. She pressed her back against the display counter, wishing she could dissolve into the wood. "Old building. Very dangerous. You should leave before the ceiling caves in. It's imminent." "I like dangerous buildings." He didn't stop. He walked right up to the front counter, leaning one hip against it. He looked too big for her shop. He took up all the air, replacing the scent of lavender with something woodsy and masculine. "I'm looking for ink." "Ink?" Isley blinked. "Yeah, something permanent. Black." His eyes drifted from her face to her hands, to the dust on her cardigan, to the way her shoulders were hunched, to the bundle of yellowed envelopes she was clutching behind her back. Isley gripped them tighter. The crinkle of the old paper sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "We have pens," she said breathlessly. "Aisle 1, ballpoints, gel, felt tip." "I don't want a Bic, Isley. I want the real stuff. The kind you dip. The kind that stains." He knew her name. Of course he did. He was an investigator. He probably knew her shoe size and her social security number. He took another step closer, invading her personal space. He sniffed the air, a deliberate, theatrical inhale. Lavender, he noted, and beeswax, and something else. He tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. Old paper, oxidation, vanillin. It's a stationery shop, Isley said, backing up until her heels hit the back counter. She was trapped between the display of Italian marbles and the man who could ruin everything. Everything is paper. It all smells old. No, Flynn said softly. This smells like archives, like secrets. He grinned then. It was a slow, lopsided grin that probably worked on everyone. It was designed to disarm, to make you feel like you were in on the joke. It made Isley want to hide under the display table and never come out. I love secrets, he whispered. I don't have secrets, Isley stammered. I sell greeting cards. Do you need a birthday card? A sympathy card? A sorry I broke into your shop card? Maybe a sympathy card. My producer is killing me. He moved again, closing the distance. He wasn't aggressive, exactly. He just had a gravitational pull. He reached out, his hand hovering near the ink display on the counter between them. He was distracting her. She knew it, but she couldn't look away. What's that? He asked, nodding at something behind her, over her shoulder. What? Isley turned her head for a split second, instinct overriding caution. It was a trick. A cheap schoolyard trick. In that second, he leaned over the counter, his eyes locking onto the bundle in her hand that was now partially visible. Elias Thorne, he read aloud, his voice dropping an octave. Isley shrieked. It wasn't a dignified sound. It was the sound of a cornered animal. She jerked back, trying to shield the letters. Her elbow slammed into the display of sample inks. Crash! A glass bottle of Midnight Noir, her most expensive, most permanent pigment, shattered on the floor. Black ink exploded. It wasn't a splash. It was a detonation. It sprayed across the hem of her cream skirt. It splattered onto the pristine 100-year-old oak floorboards. And it sprayed across the counter, droplets launching like shrapnel to land on Flynn's leather jacket. Oh no, Isley gasped, the letters momentarily forgotten as the disaster unfolded. She dropped the bundle onto the dry part of the counter, a fatal mistake, and grabbed a rag from under the till. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. The finish! The floor! She frantically started dabbing at the puddle, her hands instantly turning black. The ink was cool and slick, soaking into her skin, marking her. Flynn didn't move. He didn't check his jacket. He didn't look at the floor. He didn't seem to care that he was currently speckled with $40 worth of pigment. He was staring at the letters. Specifically, he was staring at the red wax seal on the top envelope, the one Isley had been trying to hide. That crest, he murmured, reaching out. His fingers were long, calloused. Don't touch it! Isley swatted his hand away with her ink-stained fingers, leaving a smeared black handprint on his wrist. Flynn looked at the smudge. Then he looked at her. His eyes were wide, suddenly serious. The charm was gone. The lazy, flirtatious grin evaporated, replaced by a laser-like focus that terrified her more than the charm ever could. This was the predator. This was the man who took down corrupt politicians and corporate frauds. That's the founder's seal, he said. The original one, from the museum archives. It's a replica, Isley lied, her voice high and thin, vibrating with panic. Ideally accurate. For collectors, it's a prop. No, Flynn said softly. Replicas don't crumble like that. He pointed to a tiny flake of red wax on the counter, a casualty of her rough handling. Wax from that era has a specific brittle quality. Modern wax is flexible. That? He looked at her, his gaze heavy. That's 19th century sealing wax. He looked up at her eyes, and Isley saw it happen. She saw the shark smell blood in the water. You found something, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I found nothing. Get out. Isley. Get out. She pointed to the door with a shaking, ink-blackened hand. She looked like Lady Macbeth, if Lady Macbeth was a terrified calligrapher in a cardigan. Flynn hesitated. He looked at the letters again, hunger warring with something else in his face. Hesitation? Pity? Then he looked at her frantic, terrified expression. He saw the way she was trembling. He stood up straight. He held up his hands in surrender, palms out. The black smudge on his wrist stood out starkly against his skin. Okay, he said slowly. I'm going. He backed away toward the door, his boots thudding softly now, respectful of the tension. But Isley... What? She snapped, clutching the letters to her chest again, ruining her cardigan with the ink on her hands, but she didn't care. Flynn paused with his hand on the brass doorknob. The wind outside rattled the glass pane. Ink doesn't wash out, he said. His voice was low, devoid of mockery now. And neither does the truth. Whatever you're hiding, it's going to come out. It always does. And when it does, you're going to want someone on your side who knows how to spin it. He opened the door. The bell chimed again, a mournful, final sound. Think about it, he said. And then he was gone, swallowed by the dark January night. Isley stood alone in the center of her shop, surrounded by the smell of lavender and disaster. She looked down at the black puddle spreading across the floor, staining the history she loved so much. She looked at the letters in her hands. She sank to her knees, heedless of the ink. It soaked into her skirt, cold and wet. Oh, Elias, she whispered to the ghost in the wall, tears pricking her eyes. What have you done? Chapter 2. Flynn Hawthorne hated the Heartstopper. It was a triple-shot mocha with raspberry syrup, topped with pink whipped cream and heart-shaped sprinkles that had the texture of chalk. It tasted like diabetes and commercial desperation. It tasted like everything he cynically despised about Valentine's Verge, Vermont. He took a sip, winced as the sugar hit his molars, and grimaced. This is punishment, he muttered into his portable recorder, his voice low enough not to disturb the tourists at the next table. This is penance for that time I stole a lead from the Times. They were loud, happy, and oblivious. Flynn envied them. He envied their ability to swallow the town's myth whole without choking on the artifice. He clicked the record button again, watching the little red light blink. Day 21 in Valentine's Verge, he rasped, dropping into his serious journalist voice, the one that had won him a podcast award 2 years ago. The sugar crash is imminent. The town is still vibrating from the success of the First Date Festival. But underneath the fondant and the fairy lights, something is rotting. He paused. He looked out the frosted window at the town square, where the bronze statue of Elias Thorne stood vigilant in the snow. Is it rotting? He whispered to the microphone. Or am I just bored? He clicked stop. He rubbed his face, feeling the stubble on his jaw. He was tired. Not the good kind of tired that comes from chasing a lead or breaking a story. This was the exhaustion of stagnation. His producer, Sarah, had emailed him an hour ago. The subject line was just numbers. The body of the email was a single graph showing his listener count for Cold Truth flatlining like a dead patient. Below it, a note in bold red text. Find a body, Flynn. Or find a scandal. If the next episode is another Quaint Traditions of New England piece, the network is pulling the plug. We need meat. We need blood. He needed a body. What he had was a town where the biggest controversy was whether the ceremonial scissors for the ribbon cutting were Victorian red or cardinal red. Until tonight. He looked down at his left wrist. There, stark against his pale skin, was a faint smudge of black ink. It was dried now, settling into the lines of his skin like a tattoo. Isley Martin, the shopkeeper, the mouse, the one person in this town who didn't look at him like he was a minor celebrity or a fresh piece of meat. She looked at him like he was a bacterial infection she was trying to scrub away. She was quiet. She was weird. She wore cardigans that looked like they belonged in a museum. And she was hiding something massive. He replayed the moment in his head. The panic in her eyes. Genuine, animal panic. The way she had tried to body block a pile of old paper. The crash of the ink bottle. And that seal. He knew that seal. He had spent 3 agonizing weeks in the town archives, which were surprisingly decent, smelling of cedar and preservation, researching the Thorne family, trying to find dirt on the current mayor. He had seen the facsimile of Elias Thorne's seal, the rose and the quill. The wax on the counter hadn't been a facsimile. It had crumbled. It had been old. Elias Thorne, Flynn whispered. If the founder left something behind, secrets, journals, confessions, that contradicted the perfect love story brand, that would be the body Sarah wanted. That would be the scandal. The fraud of Valentine's Verge. It was perfect. It was mean. It was exactly what he needed to save his career. So why did he feel a twinge of guilt in his gut? Because she looked terrified, he answered himself. Isley hadn't looked like a conspirator. She had looked like someone whose world was ending. He downed the rest of the Heartstopper, wincing at the final sludge of syrup at the bottom. Time to go hunting, he said, grabbing his jacket. The wind outside the written word was vicious. It was a wet, heavy cold that disregarded layers and went straight for the bone. Flynn stood on the sidewalk, hands shoved deep into his pockets, staring at the shop. The lights were off. The sign in the window said, "Closed," in elegant, hand-lettered script. But he could see a faint, warm glow in the back room. She was still there. He checked his watch. 9:15 p.m. Most people in this town were asleep by 9. He stepped into the vestibule, out of the wind, and tried the door. Locked. He knocked. Not a polite, neighborly rap, a confident, persistent knock. Rat-a-tat-tat. No answer. He waited 10 seconds. He knocked again, louder. "I know you're in there, Isley," he called out, his voice muffled by the glass. "I can see your shadow. It's very distinct. You have excellent posture. Even your shadow looks stressed." The shadow moved. It hesitated, wavering against the back wall. Then, slowly, painfully slowly, it approached the door. Isley appeared in the glass. She looked like a wreck. She wasn't wearing the cardigan anymore. She was wearing a heavy canvas apron over a dress that looked like it belonged in a period drama. The apron was covered in black smudges. Her hair, usually neat, was pulled back in a chaotic bun held together by a single yellow pencil. She unlocked the door but didn't open it. She just cracked it an inch, leaving the chain on. "We are closed," she hissed through the gap. "Go away." "I can't," Flynn said, leaning his shoulder against the door frame. "I have an ethical dilemma. I need a second opinion. I sell stationery, Mr. Hawthorne, not ethics. Try the priest down the street." "Flynn, call me Flynn. And you sell ink, which means you deal in permanence. That's adjacent to ethics." "That makes no sense." She tried to close the door. He stuck the toe of his boot in the gap. It was a jerk move, he knew it. He did it anyway. "Isley, the letters." She froze. The resistance in the door vanished. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The letters you dropped. The ones with the thorn seal. The ones you looked ready to eat rather than let me see. They were receipts. Old receipts. Boring tax documents. Receipts addressed to Dearest Eleanor?" Isley went pale. Even in the dim light of the vestibule, he saw the blood drain from her face, leaving her eyes looking huge and dark. "You read it?" she whispered. "I read the top line. Before you tried to drown me in midnight noir." She stared at him through the crack. "You can't prove anything," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. "It's hearsay." "I'm a podcaster, Isley. Hearsay is my currency. I can go back to my room right now and record an episode titled The Secret Letters of Elias Thorne. I can speculate. I can interview Mrs. Gable about who Eleanor might be. I can turn this town upside down looking for the rest of them. I can make Eleanor a household name by morning." He watched the threat land. He watched her calculate the fallout. He watched the realization sink in. He held the match that could burn down the town's mythology. "You'd destroy the town," she said. "The legend is all we have. If you run a story saying Elias was unfaithful, or that the history is a lie, the tourists stop coming, my shop closes, the hearth closes. Everyone loses their jobs. Sarah doesn't care about the tourists. She cares about clicks." "But you care," Isley said. It caught him off guard. He blinked. "Do I?" Flynn stared at her. Nobody had analyzed him like that in years. Certainly not someone he was arguably blackmailing. He slowly pulled his foot out of the door. "Okay," he said, his voice softer. "You're right. I care about the truth, which is why I want to know what's in those letters." "Why?" "Because if Elias Thorne was a liar, that's the truth. And it deserves to be told. But," he ran a hand through his hair, "I don't want to burn the town down just for a graph on an email." He took a step back, giving her space. "Here's the deal, Isley. I won't record the episode. I won't speculate. I won't tell Mrs. Gable." "What do you want?" "I want access." "Access?" "I want to read them. I want to help you investigate whatever this is. I have resources. I have archival access in 3 states. I know how to track down ghosts. I know how to follow a paper trail better than anyone." "And in exchange?" "In exchange," Flynn said, looking her in the eye, "I get the story. If it's true, and if we can prove it, and... And I get final approval on how it's framed. I won't let it be a hit piece. I'll make it a history piece. Isley bit her lip. She looked back into the dark shop where the letters were presumably hiding. Then she looked back at him. She was weighing the devil she knew against the devil on her doorstep. You want to help me? I want the scoop, Isley. Helping you is just a perk. She studied him for a long moment. He tried to look trustworthy. He wasn't sure he remembered how to make that face, but he tried. Finally, she sighed, a sound of surrender. Fine, she whispered. Come in. She undid the chain. She opened the door wide. Flynn stepped inside. The shop was warm. It smelled of lavender, old paper, and secrets. But Flynn, she said as she locked the door behind him, the bolt sliding home with a heavy thud. Yeah? If you betray me, she said, turning to face him. Her voice was surprisingly steady. I know where you sleep, and I have a lot of letter openers. Very sharp ones. Flynn laughed. It was a startled, genuine sound that echoed in the quiet shop. Noted, he said. And take off your boots, she added, pointing to the mat. You're tracking mud on my clean floor. I've had enough spills for one day. Flynn looked down at his boots, then at the smudge of ink he had left on his wrist earlier. He smiled. The shark hadn't just found blood. He'd found a partner. Chapter 3. The back room of the written word felt less like a storage area and more like a confessional booth where sins were bartered for silence. It was small, oppressive, and dimly lit by a single vintage banker's lamp that cast a pool of sickly yellow light onto the desk. The air was thick with the scent of dust, lavender, and old guilt. Flynn Hawthorne sat on a stool that was comically too small for him. His long legs were sprawled out, boots crossing at the ankles, knees nearly knocking against the desk. He looked like a giant trying to have tea with a hobbit, but the way he watched her, steady, unblinking, predatory, made Isley feel like the tea was poisoned. Well, he asked, his voice low. Are we doing this or not? Isley sat at her desk, her posture rigid. The bundle of letters rested on the green blotter in front of her, a parchment time bomb. She had spent the last 20 minutes scrubbing the ink off the floorboards, but her hands were still stained a faint, ghostly gray. The midnight noir had settled into her cuticles, marking her. You have to promise, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hand hovered over the cracked red wax seal on the first envelope, trembling slightly. If this is just gossip, if it's just a man stepping out on his wife, we burn it. Flynn frowned, the lines around his eyes deepening. We don't burn history, Isley. Even the ugly parts, especially the ugly parts. We do if it hurts people, she shot back, finding a spark of courage. This town relies on the legend of Elias and Margaret. It's the foundation of everything. If we prove he was a scoundrel, or that the love story was a sham, half the businesses on Main Street go under, including mine. I can't sell romance if the founder was a liar. Flynn sighed. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, invading her space again. Okay, compromise. If it's just a sordid affair with no historical value, just sex and lies, we bury it. I won't run it. I won't pitch it. It stays in the wall. Promise? Promise. Journalist's honor. Is that a real thing? Isley asked, skepticism dripping from her tone. Occasionally, Flynn grinned, a flash of white teeth in the dim light. When it suits us. Isley took a deep breath, holding it in her lungs until they burned. She picked up her silver letter opener, the sharp one she had threatened him with earlier. The metal was cool against her sweaty palm. She slid the blade under the brittle wax of the first envelope. Snap. The sound was loud in the quiet room, a century of silence breaking. It felt like breaking a bone. She pulled out the folded parchment. It was thin, almost translucent with age, rustling like dry leaves. She unfolded it carefully, terrified it would disintegrate. The ink had faded to a sepia brown, but the handwriting was firm, bold, aggressive. "Read it," Flynn whispered, leaning closer. She could smell him now. Leather, cold air, and something sharp like cedar. Isley cleared her throat. She focused on the words, trying to detach herself from the meaning. "My dearest Eleanor, it is done. The papers are signed. The merger is complete. I am to marry Margaret in the spring when the snow melts. Her father has agreed to cover the debts of the mill and the Valley holdings." Isley paused. She looked up at Flynn. His face was unreadable. "A merger," Flynn said flatly. "Romantic." Isley continued reading, her voice shaking as the reality of the words sank in. "I do this not for greed, nor for ambition. You know this. I do this because the Valley is dying. The families here, the Millers, the Davises, your own kin, they will starve if the mill closes. Margaret brings the capital we need to survive. She is a kind woman. She knows my heart belongs to another, though she does not know your name. She accepts the arrangement. She desires the title of Founder's Wife more than she desires my affection." Isley lowered the letter. The paper trembled in her hands. She felt a sudden, stinging pressure behind her eyes. "It wasn't an affair," she whispered. "It was a sacrifice." Flynn stood up, the stool scraping against the floor. He walked over to the desk, standing behind her, looking over her shoulder at the letter. His presence was a warm weight at her back. "He sold himself," Flynn murmured, "to save the town. The capital of romance was founded on a marriage of convenience, a business transaction to save the locals from starvation." "But he loved her," Isley said, pointing to the bottom of the page where the ink was smudged, as if a hand had rested there too long. "My heart remains yours, Eleanor. Every brick I lay in this town, every tree I plant, I do it thinking of you. I am building a paradise I can never share with you." She looked up at Flynn, twisting in her chair. That's tragic and beautiful." "It's a lie," Flynn corrected, his voice hard. "The legend says he built the town for Margaret. Because he loved her so much he wanted to give her a kingdom. This says he built it for the money to save his neighbors while pining for someone else." "It's not a malicious lie," Isley argued, defensive of her town's ghost. "He saved them. He saved us." "It's still a lie, Isley. The tourists date here because they think the love is the magic precipitant. If they find out the founder was in a loveless contract, then the magic dies." Isley slumped back in her chair, the letter fluttering to the desk. She felt deflated. The town felt different already, less like a fairy tale kingdom and more like a stage set painted to look like one. "We have to find out who Eleanor was," Flynn said, pacing the small room now. "The letter doesn't give a last name, just Eleanor." Isley picked up the envelope, examining it under the lamplight. "There's no address. It wasn't mailed, it was hidden. Hidden in the wall. Which means Eleanor might have been close. Maybe she worked for him? Or she lived here, in this building." Isley looked around the shop, seeing it with new eyes. This building. Before it was a shop, it was the post office, back in the 1890s. And before that, it was a boarding house for mill workers. Maybe she was the postmistress? Flynn's eyes lit up, the narrative gears turning in his head. The postmistress and the mayor. Forbidden love, scandalous. He reached for the second letter in the stack, eager. Hey! Isley slapped his hand away. My shop, my letters. Our investigation, he countered, though he pulled his hand back with a smirk. Context clues, Isley. Look at the second one. Does it give a location? A meeting place? Isley scanned the second page of the first letter, squinting at the faded script. I cannot bear to see you at the church on Sundays. It breaks me to see you in the choir, knowing I cannot hold your hand. I will not write again to this address. It is too dangerous. Meet me at the place where the water meets the stone, the hiding place. I will leave my thoughts there if I cannot speak them. Water meets stone, Isley repeated. The river, Flynn suggested. The falls, that big rock by the bridge where teenagers go to make out. It's vague. There are a lot of rocks in the river, Flynn. This is Vermont. No. The place where the water meets the stone. It sounds specific, a landmark, something they both knew. Isley closed her eyes, picturing the valley map she kept in her head. She traced the river, the old roads, the buildings that had stood since 1890. Water, stone, a hiding place, a place connected to the mill. The old liquidation mill, she said, her eyes snapping open. The hearth. Hallie's place? Before it was a market, it was a grist mill, a textile mill. It had a water wheel, a massive stone foundation that sits right in the river. There's a sluice gate underneath. Rose uses that basement for her forge now. It's literally where the water meets the stone foundation. Flynn grinned. It was the shark grin again. Sharp, hungry, and dangerously charming. Then we have a destination. He grabbed his leather jacket from the back of the chair, swinging it on. Now? Isley asked, blinking. It's midnight. Best time for ghost hunting, unless you're scared. Isley looked at the letter. I do this because the valley is dying. Elias had sacrificed his happiness, his name, and his life for the town. The least she could do was sacrifice a night of sleep to understand why. And she wanted to know. She needed to know if Eleanor ever wrote back. She stood up, smoothing her ink-stained apron. She felt a strange thrill, a mixture of fear and adrenaline she hadn't felt since she was a child. I'm not scared, she lied, lifting her chin. But if we get arrested for trespassing in my best friend's building, you're calling the mayor. Deal. Flynn held out his hand. Isley looked at it. It was large, warm, and calloused. A hand that wrought trouble. A hand that unearthed secrets. She took it. Deal, she whispered. And for the second time that night, Isley Martin felt the ground feel a little less solid. But this time, she didn't look for something to hold on to. She grabbed her coat. Chapter 4. Flynn woke up to the smell of bacon and Mrs. Gable's aggressive hospitality. He was staying in the Cupid's Quiver suite at the Love Nest B&B. It was pink. Aggressively, violently pink. The pillows were shaped like lips. The rug was a white shag that looked like a skinned muppet. It was the kind of room that tried to smother you with romance in your sleep, pressing doilies over your face until you submitted to the aesthetic. He sat up, rubbing his face with a groan. He had slept for 4 hours, his dreams a weird mix of crumbling walls and Isley Martin's terrified eyes. He swung his legs out of bed and nearly stepped on something white. A rectangle of paper slipped under his door. Flynn picked it up. It wasn't standard printer paper. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock with a textured, deckled edge. It felt expensive. It felt like Isley. He turned it over. Mr. Hawthorne, the hearth is active during the day. Hallie will be there in the main hall, and Rose works in the forge until 6. We cannot be seen. Meet me at the sluice gate entrance, Riverside, at 7 p.m. Do not be late. Do not wear squeaky shoes. I am. Flynn stared at it. The handwriting was insane. It was perfect copperplate script, the kind you saw on wedding invitations or the Declaration of Independence. The ink was a deep, shimmering violet. The F in Flynn had a flourish that looked like a bird taking flight. The M in Isley's signature was sharp, precise. "Who leaves a note?" he muttered, tracing the ink with his thumb. "It's 2024, just text me. Or DM me. Or knock." But he was smiling. He looked at his phone on the nightstand. No notifications. He realized he hadn't given her his number, and she, being Isley, presumably looked him up in the B&B guest registry but couldn't bring herself to knock on his door. She probably spent 20 minutes debating the stationery choice. So she wrote. "Ink doesn't stutter," he remembered her saying. It was charming. Annoyingly charming. He grabbed a pen from the nightstand, a cheap hotel ballpoint that clicked loudly, and scribbled on the back of the card. His handwriting was chicken scratch compared to hers. "I'll be there, wearing my stealth boots. F." He paused. Then he walked to the door, opened it, and looked into the hallway. Empty. The smell of bacon was stronger now. He felt ridiculous. He felt like he was in middle school passing notes. But he went downstairs and asked Mrs. Gable if she could deliver a reply to Miss Martin. Mrs. Gable looked at the note, then at Flynn. She was wearing a floral apron that hurt his eyes. Her eyes narrowed behind her spectacles. "Correspondence," she sniffed. "With Isley? You two are moving fast. Or slow. I can't decide." "Business," Flynn said smoothly, leaning against the door frame. "Paper supply logistics. Boring stuff." Mrs. Gable didn't look convinced, but she took the note. "I'll see she gets it with her morning delivery. But warn a girl, Mr. Hawthorne. Ink stains." Flynn wasn't sure if that was a metaphor or a laundry tip. The hearth at 7 p.m. was a shadowy beast of a building. The massive brick structure loomed over the river, dark against the twilight sky. The water rushed past the frozen water wheel with a low, churning roar. The windows of the main market floor were dark, but the street lamps reflected off the icy river, casting long, dancing shadows against the brickwork. Flynn waited by the lower door, near the waterline. It was freezing damp down here, the kind of cold that seeped through denim. He zipped his leather jacket up to his chin. A shadow detached itself from the wall. "You're late," Isley whispered. "It is 7:01. Flynn checked his watch, keeping his voice low. "And I'm wearing sneakers. Stealth achieved." Isley was wearing a long wool coat that swallowed her frame, and a scarf wrapped 3 times around her neck, burying her nose. She looked like a cozy spy, or a very cold librarian. "Come on," she said, her voice muffled by the wool. "I have a key. Rose gave me a spare for emergencies. I consider this an emergency." She unlocked the heavy iron door. It groaned, a low, protesting sound, before swinging open. They slipped inside. The smell hit him instantly. Coal dust, hot metal, ozone, and damp stone. This was Rose's domain, the forge in the basement. It was dark, silent except for the rushing water outside. The silence felt heavy, weighted by the massive anvil in the center of the room. The only light came from the street lamps filtering through the high, grimy windows, painting the concrete floor in stripes of silver and black. "The letter said, 'Where the water meets the stone,'" Isley whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. She turned on a small flashlight. The beam cut through the dust motes dancing in the air. The sluice gate is over there. She pointed to a massive stone archway set into the foundation wall, where the river water used to be diverted to turn the wheel. It was bricked up now, but the original foundation stones were still there, slick with moisture and spotted with moss. Flynn walked over, running his hand along the rough granite. It was cold and slimy. "It's a hiding place," he murmured. Elias said he would leave his thoughts here, if he couldn't speak them. He scanned the wall. It was a mess of moss, old mortar, and brick repairs. "Look for a loose one," Isley said, joining him. "Or a mark. Something that looks intentional." They searched in silence for 10 minutes. The only sounds were their breathing and the scratching of Isley's flashlight beam against the stone. Flynn checked the higher stones, stretching up. Isley checked the lower ones, crouching in the dust. "Flynn," she said softly. He looked down. She was kneeling in the dirt, shining her light on a stone near the floor, right where the old waterline stain was. It was a large rectangular block of granite. "There's no mortar around this one," she said. "Look, the others have cement. This one just has packed dirt." She pulled a small metal tool, a letter opener, from her pocket and wedged it into the crack. "Did you bring a weapon?" Flynn asked, amused. "It's a tool," she grunted, prying at the stone. "And yes." "Allow me," Flynn said, crouching down beside her. "I have leverage and less elegant tools." He pulled out his pocket knife. He worked the blade in, wiggling the heavy stone. It shifted. "Great." "Gotcha," he whispered. With a heave, he pulled the stone loose. It slid out with a grinding sound, heavy and awkward. He set it aside. A dark cavity was revealed behind it. A hollow space in the foundation, dry and protected from the damp. Flynn's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The smoking gun. The proof. He shone his light inside. Empty. "It's gone," he said, disappointment crashing over him like the river water outside. He felt physically deflated. Someone found it. Or he never put it here. Or the rats ate it. "Wait," Isley said. She leaned closer, practically putting her head in the hole. "It's not empty. Look at the side, the inner wall." Flynn angled the light, squinting. Carved into the inner stone of the cavity, crude and hasty, as if done with a nail or a chisel in the dark, were words. Proverbs 3:3. "Bible verse?" Flynn asked. Elias was religious? Isley sat back on her heels, blowing a strand of hair out of her face. "I know that one. It's popular on wedding invitations. I've written it 100 times in gold ink." "What does it say?" Isley closed her eyes, reciting from memory. Her voice was soft, reverent. "Let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart." Flynn stared at her. The words hung in the cold air. "Write them on the tablet of your heart," he repeated. "Heart," Isley whispered. Her eyes snapped open, locking onto his own. She looked at Flynn. He looked at her. "The statue," they said in unison. "Elias Thorne," Flynn grinned, standing up and brushing the dirt from his knees. He offered her a hand. "You sentimental bastard. You didn't hide it in a hole. You hid it in plain sight." Isley took his hand. Her grip was firm, surprisingly strong. "The statue in the square is holding a heart," she said, breathless. "A bronze heart, like a tablet. It's not just a prop. It's a container." "And if I was a betting man," Flynn said, pulling her to her feet, "I'd bet there's something inside that bronze heart. A cavity. A hollow space." "We can't break open the town statue," Isley gasped. "It's a historical landmark. It's in the middle of the square. Mrs. Gable watches it like a hawk." "We don't have to break it. We just have to inspect it. Very closely. Maybe jiggle it a little?" Isley shook her head, but she was smiling. A small, terrified, excited smile. "I am going to prison," she said. "And I'm going to take you with me. And you won't survive prison, Flynn. You have a skincare routine." "Prison creates great memoirs," Flynn winked. "Come on, partner. Let's go look at a heart." He didn't let go of her hand as they walked back to the heavy iron door. And surprisingly, Isley didn't pull away. Her hand felt small and warm in his, a grounding anchor in the dark. Chapter 5. "You can't just climb the statue," Isley hissed, her voice low and frantic against the biting wind. "It's 15 feet tall. It's bronze, and it's in the middle of the town square. People will notice. Mrs. Gable has a view of it from her bedroom window." They were walking briskly away from the mill, heads down, shoulders hunched. The adrenaline from the basement was starting to fade, replaced by the freezing reality of a Vermont January night. "I have a ladder in my truck," Flynn countered, matching her pace easily. "We wear high-vis vests, carry a clipboard, maybe a hard hat. Nobody questions a man with a clipboard. It's the universal passport of authority." "I question men with clipboards. That's literally how this started. You walked into my shop with a digital recorder and an attitude. And look where we are now. Partners in crime." They turned the corner onto Main Street, the Victorian street lamps casting long, skeletal shadows on the snow, and walked straight into a wall of floral perfume. It was a scent so overwhelming it practically had mass: rose, lilac, and judgment. "Isley Martin!" Mrs. Gable stood on the sidewalk like a sentry, wrapped in a coat that looked like it was made from 3 different bears. She was holding a rhinestone leash attached to a Pomeranian that looked less like a dog and more like a vibrating ball of hate. Isley froze. Her heart, which had just started to slow down, kick-started again. "Mrs. Gable, hi. Lovely evening for a drag?" The dog, Cupid, growled. It sounded like a chainsaw in a fur coat. Mrs. Gable ignored the dog. She fixed her gaze on Flynn, then on Isley. Her eyes narrowed to slits behind her gold-rimmed spectacles. She looked from Isley's messy hair to Flynn's wind-blown state. "It is 8:30 at night," she announced. Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "The shops are closed. The decent folk are watching Jeopardy, and you are walking in the dark with him." She said him the way one might say typhoid or tax audit. "We're working," Isley said quickly, her voice pitching up an octave. "Official business." "Working?" Mrs. Gable sniffed. "On what? Scandal? I heard he was asking questions about the mayor at the bakery, suggesting the town accounts aren't balanced." "I'm writing a profile." Flynn stepped in, his voice shifting instantly. It became smooth, deep, and utterly disarming. He flashed his grin, the one Isley was beginning to realize was a weapon. "On the artisans of Valentine's Verge. Isley is a key subject. Her calligraphy is foundational to the town's aesthetic." "Foundational?" Mrs. Gable looked skeptical. She adjusted her grip on the rhinestone leash. "She sells paper, Mr. Hawthorne. She doesn't build bridges." "Paper builds bridges between hearts," Flynn improvised, not missing a beat. He placed a hand over his heart. "It's poetic. The lost art of the handwritten letter. It's what keeps the romance alive in a digital age." Mrs. Gable blinked. Her mouth twitched. "That sounds like a line." "It is, but it's true." He stepped closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially, drawing Mrs. Gable into his orbit. "Actually, Edna, Can I call you Edna? I was hoping to interview you next. As the proprietor of the Love Nest, you must see everything. You're the eyes and ears of this town." Mrs. Gable preened. She physically fluffed her fur coat, standing a little taller. "Well, I do keep my eyes open. Vigilance is the price of romance. Young people get ideas." "Exactly. I'd love to get your perspective on the history of the town. Maybe tomorrow? Over tea?" "Make it lunch," she commanded, the steel returning to her voice. "I have a bridge club in the afternoon, and I need my energy. And wear a tie. You look like a hooligan." "Done," Flynn promised. "Carry on, then." She gave Isley a warning look that promised a thorough interrogation later. "Be careful, Isley. Riders are flighty. They come, they take, they leave." She marched off, Cupid yapping at her heels, dragging a cloud of rose perfume with her. Isley let out a long breath, watching them go. She felt like she'd just defused a bomb with a bobby pin. "You are terrifying," she said. "I am charming. There is a difference. You just promised to have lunch with the town's biggest gossip. I call that research. She knows where the bodies are buried, or at least who's sleeping with whom." He nudged her arm. "Now, come on, before she loops back." "Where are we going? Not the statue. Not with her on patrol." "No," Flynn agreed, looking back at the bronze figure of Elias Thorne in the distance. "We need more ammo before we hit the statue. We need to know who she is." "Who?" "Eleanor. We need a last name. We can't find a deed for Eleanor." Isley looked toward the town hall, a brick building at the end of the street. "The archives." The archives were located in the basement of the town hall. Unlike the rest of Valentine's Verge, which was curated for maximum coziness, warm lighting, wood paneling, velvet ropes, the basement was purely municipal. It smelled of concrete, cold floor wax, and vinegar syndrome, the distinct, sharp scent of decaying acetate and old paper. Isley unlocked the heavy steel door with a key from her keychain. It swung open with a heavy thud. "I'm not supposed to be down here after hours," she whispered, guilt prickling her neck. "You have a key," Flynn noted. "I'm on the historical committee. I cataloged the receipts for the museum. I'm trustworthy." "You were." She flipped the light switch. Rows of metal shelving illuminated with a hum of fluorescent tubes, flickering slightly before settling into a sterile buzz. The shelves were packed with leather-bound books, cardboard banker's boxes, and rolls of maps. "Welcome to the fun zone," Isley deadpanned. Flynn looked around, his eyes scanning the rows. "It's beautiful. It's dust. It's data." He walked down the aisle, running a hand along the metal shelf. "Where are the vital records? Births, deaths, marriages?" "Aisle 3. 1890s are on the bottom shelf because nobody cares about them except genealogists and us." They sat on the cold linoleum floor in aisle 3, surrounded by heavy ledgers. Isley pulled down the marriage register, 1890 to 1900. It was heavy, bound in cracked red leather. She opened it carefully. Her hands were surprisingly steady now. The historian in her had taken over. "Here," she pointed to a line written in flowing script. "May 1st, 1895. Elias Thorne to Margaret Hale." Flynn checked his phone, where he had a photo of the letter. The glow of the screen looked harsh against the yellowed paper. "The letter is dated February 14th, 1895, he said. 3 months before. "So the letter was written during the engagement," Isley whispered. "He was telling Eleanor he was going through with it. He gave her 3 months' notice." "Okay, so we know the timeline. Now we need Eleanor." "There are no Eleanors listed in the marriages for that year," Isley said, scanning the page. I checked quickly. Check the births? Or the payroll? Isley stood up and walked to the next shelf. The mill used to keep detailed employee records. Elias was obsessive about it. He cataloged every worker, every wage, every accident. She hefted a gray ledger onto one of the reading tables. Valentine Valley Mill, personnel, 1890 to 1896. She flipped the pages, the paper soft and worn at the edges. Smith, Miller, Cooper. T, she muttered. Thorne, no, he's the owner. Search by first name, Flynn suggested, reading over her shoulder. His breath stirred the loose hair near her ear. Women weren't always listed by surname if they were unmarried. Sometimes they were just Mary or Sarah. Isley scanned the E's. Edith. Ethel. Edna. Mrs. Gable's ancestor? Eleanor. She stopped. Her finger hovered over the line, trembling slightly. Eleanor Swift. Position: seamstress/textile repair. Date of hire: August 1892. Date of termination: May 2nd, 1895. May 2nd, Flynn said darkly, the day after the wedding. Isley felt a chill that had nothing to do with the basement temperature. She was fired? Or she quit because she couldn't stand to watch. Flynn reached past her, his arm brushing hers. He pointed to a note in the margin, written in Elias's familiar, looping hand. Severance paid in full. Deed transferred. Deed transferred? Flynn asked. What deed? He gave her something, Isley whispered. He paid her off. Or he gave her a going-away present, a final gesture. Flynn looked at Isley. We need to find out where Eleanor Swift went and what land she was given, because if the founder gave away land to his mistress... Isley closed the ledger with a snap. The dust motes danced in the fluorescent light. We found her, she said. Eleanor Swift. And now, Flynn said, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt, we find out what she knew. Clack. The sound of a door opening upstairs echoed down the stairwell. Heavy footsteps. Clump. Clump. Security, Isley gasped, grabbing Flynn's arm. Hide, Flynn whispered. He grabbed her hand and pulled her into the shadows between the shelves, just as the beam of a flashlight cut across the exact spot where they had been standing. Chapter 6. The beam of the flashlight swept across the archives, slicing through the darkness like a lighthouse warning of rocky shores. It illuminated dust motes and the cracked spines of ledgers before jerking away toward the reading tables. Flynn pulled Isley deeper into the gap between tax records 1920 to 1929 and land disputes 1930 to 1935. The space was narrow, barely wide enough for one person, let alone two. It smelled of dust, vinegar syndrome, the scent of decaying paper, and the faint, metallic tang of the pipes overhead. Isley was pressed against him, her back to the shelf, his chest acting as a shield. She was trembling. Not a lot, just a fine, high-frequency vibration that he could feel through the leather of his jacket. She smelled like lavender and panic. It's just the janitor, Flynn whispered, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. He felt her shiver. Or the night guard. They won't check the stacks. They never check the stacks. You don't know that, she hissed back, her voice barely a breath. She looked up at him, eyes wide and luminous in the shadows. Mr. Henderson takes his job very seriously. He carries a taser. He's been waiting for this moment since 1998. A taser? In a small-town archive? He says history must be defended with voltage. Flynn fought the urge to laugh. He liked this town. It was insane, paranoid, and obsessed with its own mythology. But he liked it. The footsteps clomped closer, heavy, deliberate boots on linoleum. Clomp, clomp, clomp. The light played across the spines of the books opposite them. Tax records, 1925. Tax records, 1926. Isley squeezed her eyes shut. She was gripping the lapels of his jacket so hard her knuckles were white. It was endearing and distracting. Flynn looked down at her. In the dim, scattered light, she looked like a Victorian ghost caught in a modern tragedy. Her hair was falling out of its messy bun, strands sticking to her cheek. Her lashes were dark against her pale skin. He realized, with a start that felt a lot like a stumble, that he wasn't thinking about the story, or the scandal, or Eleanor Swift. He was thinking about how perfectly she fit in the space between the shelves and the space against him. He was thinking that if he leaned down just 2 inches, he could kiss the panic off her mouth. Focus, Hawthorne. You're working. You're investigating a dead woman, not flirting with a live one. The footsteps paused. Hello, a voice called out. It was definitely Mr. Henderson. It sounded gruff and hopeful. I heard voices. If that's you, raccoons, I have a trap, and I'm not afraid to use the peanut butter. Raccoons. Flynn stayed perfectly still. He put a hand on Isley's back, a silent signal to hold her breath. Her spine was rigid under his palm, but she leaned into his touch. Silence stretched. The building settled with a groan of old pipes. A water drip echoed somewhere in the distance. Henderson grunted. Furnace acting up again. Sounds like ghosts. The footsteps turned. Clump, 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 fading away. The door upstairs creaked open, then slammed shut. The lock clicked. Isley let out a breath that was half sob, half laugh. She sagged against him, her forehead resting on his chest for just a second before she seemed to realize what she was doing. We survive, she whispered. We survive, Flynn agreed. He didn't move his hand from her back, though being tased by a raccoon hunter would have been great content for the podcast. Isley opened her eyes. They were dark, huge, and inches from his. You're enjoying this, she accused. I enjoy the adrenaline, don't you? No, I enjoy tea, and safety, and predictable outcomes. I enjoy knowing exactly what is going to happen next. Boring. Safe. Safe is boring, Isley. She pushed away from him, straightening her coat and smoothing her hair. She looked flustered. The proximity had gotten to her, too. Good. He wasn't the only one losing his mind in the dust. We know her name, Isley said, switching back to business mode with impressive speed, though her cheeks were flushed. Eleanor Swift, seamstress, fired the day after the wedding. And given a deed, Flynn added, stepping out of the aisle. We need to find out where she went. Did she stay in town? Did she leave? The census? Isley suggested. Too slow. And the census only happens every 10 years. She could have left in 96 and we'd miss her. We need local knowledge. We need someone who remembers the gossip from their grandmother. Mrs. Gable, Isley groaned, burying her face in her hands. Tomorrow, lunch. I'll charm the history out of her. I'll wear a tie. I'll eat watercress sandwiches. Good luck. She eats charm for breakfast, along with her bran flakes. Isley walked to the door, checking the corridor. Coast is clear. Let's get out of here before Henderson comes back with the trap. Later. Flynn walked Isley back to her shop. The town was asleep now. The snow muffled their footsteps, making the world feel small and private, wrapped in cotton. The street lamps hummed overhead, casting pools of yellow light on the pristine white ground. They stopped at her door. The written word looked cozy and safe, its windows dark. "So," Flynn said, leaning against the brickwork, "we have a name, we have a motive, we have a mystery deed. And we have a crime scene," Isley said softly. "The heart of the statue." "We'll get to the heart. But first, we need to know if Eleanor kept it." "Kept what?" "The deed. If she still owned land here, where is it? And more importantly, does she have descendants who might still own it?" Isley looked up at the moon, biting her lip. "Maybe she sold it. Moved away to start a new life. That's what I would do." "Is it?" Flynn asked. "Run away?" Isley looked at him. Her expression was guarded, raw. "If the man I loved married someone else to save the town? If I had to watch him every day building a life with her? Yeah, I'd run. I wouldn't stay and watch him build a paradise I wasn't allowed to enter." There was a pain in her voice that caught Flynn off guard. It wasn't just empathy for a dead woman. It was personal. "You speak from experience?" he asked gently. "No," Isley said, turning the key in her lock. I understand her. Ink doesn't stutter, Flynn, but sometimes silence is the only way to survive. Sometimes you have to leave the page blank." She opened the door. "Good night, investigator." "Good night, scribe." He watched her go inside. He watched the lights flicker on in the back, then off as she went upstairs to her apartment. He saw her silhouette in the window for a brief second before the curtains were drawn. He stood there for a long moment in the cold, feeling the chill settle into his bones. "Eleanor Swift," he whispered to the empty street. "Where did you go?" And more importantly, why did he feel like he was chasing a ghost that didn't want to be found? And why did the thought of Isley running away, even hypothetically, bother him more than the thought of losing the story? Chapter 7. "She moved to Oakhaven," Mrs. Gable said, slicing into her scone with the surgical precision of a woman who knew exactly where to cut to make the deepest impact. Flynn blinked. He had expected a battle. He had expected to use his entire arsenal of journalistic charm, maybe even the sad eyes routine that usually worked on sources over 60. He hadn't even finished his tea. His tie, a borrowed silk monstrosity from the B&B's lost property box, felt tight. "Excuse me?" "Eleanor Swift," Mrs. Gable repeated, dabbing a crumb from her lip with a linen napkin. "The seamstress. You asked about local history. My grandmother used to talk about her. Poor Ellie, she called her." They were sitting in the parlor of the Love Nest. It was decorated in aggressive floral chintz that made Flynn feel like he was being digested by a giant garden. Isley was sitting next to him, trying to look invisible behind a teacup that was rattling slightly in its saucer. "Why poor Ellie?" Isley asked, her voice tentative. "Because she was mad, dear. Mad as a hatter. Mad as a March hare." Mrs. Gable leaned in, lowering her voice to a theatrical whisper. "She thought Elias Thorne was writing her love letters. After he married Margaret, can you imagine the founder stepping out on St. Margaret? It was delusional, of course. Erythomania." Isley made a small, choked sound. Flynn kicked her gently under the table. "Did she keep these letters?" Flynn asked casually, buttering a scone he had no intention of eating. "As proof of her delusion?" Mrs. Gable smiled. It was the smile of a shark in pearls. "Oakhaven," Flynn said. "That's 30 minutes away?" 40 in the snow, Isley corrected instantly. The pass gets iced over. Excellent. Flynn stood up, dropping the napkin on the table. Mrs. Gable, you are a treasure, a fountain of institutional knowledge, a national resource. I know, Mrs. Gable preened, adjusting her brooch. Now, about that profile. It will be glowing, positively incandescent. I'll draft it tonight. He grabbed Isley's arm and practically dragged her out of the B&B before Mrs. Gable could ask for a deposit. Shotgun, Flynn called as they reached his truck, parked haphazardly in a snowbank. It is your truck, Isley pointed out, struggling to keep up with his long strides. You are driving, I am the hostage. You are the navigator. Get in. Isley climbed into the passenger seat of Flynn's truck. It was a sensory shock compared to the B&B. Instead of potpourri, it smelled of cedar, old coffee, and stale fries. It was a chaotic mess of recording equipment, tangled wires, fast food wrappers, and notebooks. Apologies for the office, Flynn said, sweeping a pile of papers onto the floor. I live out of this thing. It's my mobile command center. I can tell. Isley picked up a wrinkled, clear plastic badge from the dashboard. Press pass? For the New York Times? Flynn snatched it from her hand and tossed it into the glove box. Old life. We don't talk about the time. Ominous? Okay. Not ominous, just past tense. He started the engine. It groaned, sputtered, and then roared to life. They drove out of Valentine's Verge, the snowy hills rolling past like a monochrome film. For a while, the only sound was the heater rattling and the hum of the tires on the icy road. So, Flynn said, breaking the silence, Oak Haven. Why there? It's the next valley over, Isley said, watching the trees pass. Close enough to visit, far enough to be forgotten. If Elias gave her land, maybe the deed was for a plot in Oak Haven? Maybe. Or maybe she just ran. Wanted to be somewhere where nobody knew her name. Flynn glanced at Isley. She was staring out the window, her profile sharp against the white blur of the snow. She looked sad. Not just bored sad, but soul sad. You really care about them, don't you? He asked. Elias and Eleanor. It's just... She turned to him, her eyes fierce. Imagine being her, watching him build this town, watching him put up banners about eternal love while he's married to someone else, and knowing the truth, but never being able to say it. Being called Mad Ellie because the truth was too inconvenient for everyone else. She kept the letters, Flynn noted. She didn't burn them. Proof, Isley said. Or comfort. Or leverage. Isley frowned. Not everyone is cynical, Flynn. Maybe she just loved him. In my experience, Isley, yeah, they are. People keep things for two reasons, sentiment or insurance. Usually insurance. He turned on the radio to fill the silence. A classic rock station crackled to life through the static. Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy? Queen, Isley asked, surprised. I pegged you for strictly NPR and brooding jazz. Bohemian Rhapsody is a masterpiece. Don't judge. And for the record, I brood to the Rolling Stones. I'm not judging. I'm impressed. Maybe there's hope for you yet. I contain multitudes, scribe. They bickered about music for the next 20 miles. It was easy. Surprisingly easy. Flynn realized he hadn't relaxed this much in months. Usually, when he was in a car, he was chasing a lead, fighting a deadline, or dodging his producer. With Isley, he was just driving. The Oak Haven Historical Society was a small, severe brick building that looked like it used to be a jail. It probably was. The curator was a woman named Doris, who looked like she had been there since the jail was active. She wore a cardigan that rivaled Isley's in wool content. Swift? Doris squinted at them through bifocals. We have a Swift box. Nobody asks for it. It's mostly tax returns and receipts. We love tax returns, Flynn beamed. We are forensic accountants. You don't look like accountants. Casual Friday. Doris huffed and dumped a cardboard box on the viewing table. Dust plumed up like a mushroom cloud. Isley dove in. She sorted through papers with a speed and dexterity that Flynn found mesmerizing. Her hands moved like birds, flipping, scanning, discarding. Receipts, land tax, seamstress invoices. Here, she gasped. She pulled out a small leather-bound journal. The leather was cracked, the binding loose. It's her diary, she whispered. Flynn moved to stand behind her, reading over her shoulder. Open it. She turned the pages. The handwriting was jagged, frantic, different from the neat script in the archives. June 1895. He calls it a sacrifice. He says we are saving the valley, but it feels like a funeral. I saw Margaret today. She was wearing my dress. July 1895. I saw him today. He looked at me across the square. He looked hollow. He is a ghost in a suit. August 1895. The deed arrived. He gave me the hollow, the lands by the mines. He says it is worthless now, but one day it will be my fortune. The hollow, Flynn said. Where is the hollow? The old mines, Isley said. That's the outskirts. It's rocky, bad soil. Nobody lives there. She turned the page. September 1895. I wrote back. I told him I cannot stay. I cannot be the shadow in his perfect town. I will go to Oak Haven, but I will not give back the deed. It is the only promise he kept. Isley looked up. She kept the land. The deed wasn't for Oak Haven. It was for land in Valentine's Verge. He gave her part of the town. If she still owns it, Flynn started, the implications cascading in his mind. Then the current ownership is invalid, Isley finished. The corporation that bought the town in the 80s, the council, they don't own the land near the mines. Eleanor does. And her descendants. Flynn's phone buzzed in his pocket. Sarah. He ignored it. We need to find out who inherited the hollow, he said. If Eleanor died alone. Isley turned to the last page of the diary. I leave this to my daughter, my secret heart. May she find a love that is not a lie. Daughter? Flynn asked. Eleanor had a daughter? Isley went pale. Flynn, she whispered. Look at the date of the entry. February 14th, 1896. 1 year after the first letter, Flynn calculated. 9 months after the wedding. He looked at Isley. The realization hit them both at the same time, heavy and suffocating. Elias's daughter, Flynn said. Eleanor had Elias Thorne's child. Conceived before the wedding or right after? Does it matter? Isley whispered. The scandal wasn't just a marriage of convenience. It was an illegitimate heir, and that heir owned a chunk of the town. Flynn felt the familiar rush of the story, the big one, the career maker. This was it. This was the Pulitzer. But then he looked at Isley. She didn't look excited. She looked devastated. This destroys everything, she whispered. The lineage, the legend. If the founder had a secret family, then the mayors, the council, they're all imposters? Or maybe... It rewrites history, Flynn said softly. It ruins lives, she countered. She looked at him, searching his face. Are you going to run it? Flynn looked at the diary, then at Isley. We need proof, he said, dodging the question. We need to find the daughter. We need to trace the line. But if we find it, if it's true, then I have to run it, Isley. It's the truth. Especially then. He watched her face close off. The warmth from the car ride evaporated. He started the engine. The truth was going to cost him. He just hoped the price wasn't her. Chapter 8. The ride back to Valentine's Verge was silent. The Queen playlist had ended miles ago. The silence in the cab was thick, heavy with the weight of a century-old secret. The windshield wipers beat a rhythmic thwack hiss against the falling snow, keeping time with Flynn's racing thoughts. An illegitimate child. Flynn drove automatically, his hands tight on the wheel. His mind was spinning, connecting dots he hadn't even known were there. This was it. This was the narrative arc Sarah wanted, only better. It wasn't just, the town is a lie. It was, the secret heir. It was Anastasia meets Peyton Place with a side of property law. He glanced at Isley. She was huddled against the passenger door, staring out at the blurred white landscape. She clutched the diary in her lap with both hands like it was a live grenade that might go off if she let go. Isley, he said. She didn't turn. Don't. We can't pretend we didn't find it. We can, she said, her voice brittle. We can put it back in the box. We can forget we ever went to Oak Haven. You don't believe that. You're a historian. You want to know. It's eating you up already. I'm a shopkeeper. I sell paper. I don't want to dismantle the town's entire identity. She turned to him then, eyes blazing. You don't get it, Flynn. You see a headline. You see a graph going up. I see my neighbors. Mrs. Gable? She prides herself on being a daughter of the compact. If it turns out the founder had another family, it invalidates everyone. It turns their heritage into a joke. It doesn't invalidate them. It just complicates them. History is messy, Isley. It's always messy. Complication kills tourism. People come here for the fairy tale. They don't come for the messy paternity suit. She turned back to the window. Flynn sighed. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles cracked. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that the truth was always better, that sunlight was the best disinfectant. But looking at her slumped shoulders, looking at the way she was shrinking into herself, he wasn't so sure. Maybe some ghosts should stay buried. He dropped her off at the written word. The snow was falling harder now, coating the town in a deceptive layer of pristine white. I'm keeping the diary, she said, hugging it to her chest as she opened the door. For safekeeping. Fine, but I have photos. I know. She unlocked her shop door. She paused, her hand on the brass handle. Flynn? Yeah? Thank you for driving, even if I hate where we went. Anytime, scribe. She went inside. The bell chimed, a lonely sound in the muffled street. Flynn drove the 2 blocks to the Love Nest. He went up to his room, kicking off his boots. He sat on his bed, surrounded by the aggressively pink pillows that mocked his current mood. He opened his laptop. The screen glow beat back the dark. Subject, update. 2, Sarah, producer. He stared at the blinking cursor. It pulsed like a heartbeat. He should write it. Found evidence of secret child. Checking deed records tomorrow. This is big. This is the smoking gun. He typed. Still digging. Found a diary. Might lead to something. He deleted secret child. He typed. It's complicated. Need more time to verify. He hit send before he could change his mind. He closed the laptop with a snap. He felt like a coward. Or maybe he felt like a human being. It was a confusing distinction for a journalist. He looked at the door. There was no note this time. No elegant cream cardstock. No copperplate script. He felt a pang of disappointment that was surprisingly sharp. He grabbed a piece of hotel notepad paper, cheap, flimsy stuff with the Love Nest logo watermark. He grabbed his pen. Isley, I sent the update. I didn't mention the baby. Yet. Meet me at the archives tomorrow. We track the deed. Ink doesn't stutter, but sometimes it hesitates. Trust me? F. He paused. He crossed out, trust me? It was asking too much. He walked down the hall in his socks. He slipped it under her shop door on his way to get coffee? No, that was creepy. And cold. He went downstairs. Mrs. Gable was at the desk, sorting mail with terrifying efficiency. Another note? She raised an eyebrow. It's a very urgent paper emergency. Mrs. Gable sighed. You too. It's like watching a snail race. A very stubborn, very slow snail race. I don't know what that means, Edna, but I assume it's an insult. It is. She took the note. I'll see she gets it. Isley found the note when she opened the shop the next morning. It was wedged between the door and the jamb. I didn't mention the baby. Yet. He was giving her time. He was holding back the shark. She felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the radiator kicking on. She went to her desk. She pulled out a fresh sheet of her best parchment. She dipped her favorite nib into the Midnight Noir, the replacement bottle. Flynn, thank you. The archives open at 9. I'll bring the coffee. You bring the lies. Postscript. Snail races are surprisingly intense. The stakes are low, but the slime is high. Pier Mace. She walked to the B&B. She slipped it under his door herself this time, stepping quietly on the floral carpet. She heard movement inside, the creak of a bed spring, footsteps approaching the door. She ran. She was breathless when she got back to the shop. She felt ridiculous. She felt alive. Hallie walked in 5 minutes later, stomping snow off her boots. Why are you flushed? Hallie asked, eyeing her. And why are you wearing your action cardigan? The one with the elbow patches? I have no idea what you mean. Isley busied herself with stacking envelopes, hiding her trembling hands. You're up to something. Does it involve the rugged podcaster? It involves history, Hallie. Serious history. Archival research. Right, history. Is that what we're calling it now? Making history? Hallie grinned. Just be careful, Iz. He's leaving, remember? He's chasing a story. That's who he is. I know, Isley said, the warmth fading slightly. I know he is. But as she looked at the note on her desk, sometimes ink hesitates. She allowed herself to hope, just for a second, that maybe the story wasn't the only thing he was chasing. Maybe he was chasing a reason to stay. Chapter 9. The snow started around noon. It wasn't a playful flurry, the kind that tourists Instagrammed with captions about winter wonderlands. It was a Vermont declaration of war. The sky turned a bruised, swollen purple, and the flakes came down thick and heavy, erasing the mountains line by line until the world was just a white void. Isley and Flynn were in his truck, parked at the end of a long, overgrown driveway on the edge of town. The tires had crunched over gravel and ice to get here, and now they were silent, the engine ticking as it cooled. The Thorne Homestead, Flynn read from the map on his phone, though the signal was fading to 1 bar. Abandoned since the 1950s. Owned by the Historical Society, but maintained by apparently no one. It's creepy, Isley noted, peering through the windshield. The house was a Victorian monstrosity, a looming skeleton of architecture with peeling paint that curled like dead skin. The windows were boarded up with plywood that had turned gray with age, staring out like blind eyes. A single turret spiked up into the swirling snow, looking precarious. Mrs. Gable said Eleanor stayed here for a few weeks before she moved to Oakhaven, Flynn said, grabbing his heavy flashlight from the glove box. If she hid anything else, another letter, the deed copy, it's in there. Or we freeze to death. Valid option. I've heard hypothermia is peaceful. Come on, Scribe. Where's your sense of adventure? I left it in the heated car. They trudged through the knee-deep snow to the porch, Isley following in Flynn's boot prints to save effort. The wind howled around the corners of the house, rattling the loose shingles. The front door was locked, a rusty padlock hanging from the hasp, but the wood of the jamb was rotten, softened by decades of damp. Flynn gave it a firm shove with his shoulder, once, twice, and it groaned open with a spray of splinters. They stepped inside. The air was colder inside than out. It was a damp, still cold that smelled of mildew, wet mouse fur, and centuries of dust. Library, Flynn directed, shining his light into the gloom. If you're going to hide a deed or a letter, you do it in the library. It's poetic. They found the library on the ground floor, past a grand staircase that looked ready to collapse. The room was lined with empty bookshelves that stretched to the ceiling. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, cold and black with soot. Okay. Isley rubbed her gloved hands together, her breath puffing out in white clouds. Start searching. Loose panels, hollow books, floorboards, anything that looks disturbed. They searched for an hour. Isley checked the lower shelves, running her hands along the wood, feeling for catches or springs. Flynn checked the molding in the fireplace. The light outside began to fail rapidly, the snow piling up against the windows, sealing them in. Nothing, Flynn groaned, sitting back on his heels, his face smudged with soot. Just dust and spiders. Big spiders. The storm is getting worse, Isley said, looking out the grime-streaked window. She couldn't see the truck anymore, just a wall of white. We should go. Now. 5 more minutes. Flynn, look at the snow. The truck won't make it up the drive. It's drifted over. Flynn went to the window. He wiped a circle in the frost. He swore softly. The whiteout was absolute. We're stuck, he said. Isley felt a spike of panic in her chest. Stuck? Here? In the murder house? It's not a murder house. It's a historical landmark. Flynn turned to the fireplace. He looked at the empty grate. Then he looked at a stack of dry logs left by some previous squatter in the corner. At least there's wood. We are not camping here. Unless you want to walk 3 miles in a blizzard, Isley, we are absolutely camping here. Until the plow comes. Isley looked at the peeling wallpaper. She looked at the dark corners. Then she looked at Flynn, who was already stacking logs in the grate. He looked capable, solid. Fine, she said, defeated. But if I get eaten by a ghost, I'm haunting you. An hour later, there was a roaring fire in the grate. The library was bathed in a warm, flickering orange glow that pushed back the shadows. It was almost cozy, if you ignored the smell of damp rot and the wind shrieking outside. Isley sat on a dusty Persian rug they had shaken out, wrapped in her coat and Flynn's spare flannel shirt which smelled like him, cedar and old coffee. Flynn sat opposite her, poking the fire with an iron poker. I have survival rations, Isley offered, pulling a bag of pretzels and a half-eaten Toblerone from her purse. And breath mints. A feast, Flynn grinned. We'll live like kings. He took a pretzel. His fingers brushed hers. The contact sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with static electricity. The silence of the house was heavy, insulated by the snow. But it wasn't oppressive anymore. It was intimate. The world had shrunk down to this room, this fire, and this man. "Read the diary again," Flynn said softly. "The entry about the daughter." Isley pulled the book from her bag. It felt fragile in her hands. She opened it to the dog-eared page. "My secret heart. May she find a love that is not a lie." He never knew about her, Flynn mused, staring into the flames. Elias. He died thinking he just lost Eleanor. He didn't know he left a legacy. He built this whole town as a monument to a love he thought was barren. "It's sad," Isley whispered. "All that love, wasted on a lie." "Not wasted," Flynn said. He looked at her. The firelight carved shadows into his face, making him look sharper, more intense. "It built this place. Even if it was based on a secret, the love was real. The intention was real." "Do you believe that?" Isley asked, surprised. "That love can be real even if the circumstances are false? That sounds hopeful for a cynic." "I didn't used to," Flynn admitted. "I deal in facts, cold, hard truths, black and white. But..." He looked at her across the firelight. His eyes were soft, unguarded in a way she hadn't seen before. "But lately," he said, "I'm finding the facts are getting in the way of the feelings. I'm finding that sometimes the story isn't the most important thing." Isley felt a warmth spread through her chest that burned hotter than the fire. He was looking at her not as a source, not as a subject, but as her. Isley. She wanted to lean in. She wanted to bridge the gap between them, to crawl across the dusty rug and find out if he tasted like coffee and snowflakes. But she looked at the diary in her hands, the proof of a woman who had let herself be a secret, a woman who had loved a man who couldn't claim her. "We should rest," Isley said, her voice shaking slightly. She retreated into her coat. "We need to be sharp tomorrow to find the air." Flynn watched her for a moment. He saw the retreat. Then he nodded, a small, wry smile touching his lips. He heard the boundary. "Right," he said. "Rest. Big day hunting ghosts." Isley shifted, trying to get comfortable against the wall. She stared at the fire, trying to quiet her mind. Her eyes drifted up to the mantelpiece. It was carved wood, intricate vines and flowers winding around the shelf. But one flower was different. It was a rose, just like the seal, and the center of it was smooth, worn by touch. "Flynn," she said, sitting up. He looked up from poking the logs. "The mantle. Look at the rose." Flynn stood up. He walked over. He traced the carving. Then, with a glance at her, he pressed the center of the carved rose. Click. A small panel in the side of the mantel popped open. Isley stood up, adrenaline spiking, erasing her fatigue. She reached in. Her fingers brushed cold metal. She pulled out a flat tin box, like a biscuit tin. "Jackpot," Flynn whispered. She opened the box. Inside lay a single, folded document. She unfolded it. The heavy parchment crackled loudly in the quiet room. Deed of transfer. From Elias Thorne to Eleanor Swift. Description. All lands bordered by the Sorrow Creek and the Western Ridge. "The Western Ridge," Flynn said, reading over her shoulder, his chest pressed against her back. "That's the mines." "And the land behind the square," Isley added, tracing the survey lines with a trembling finger. This is the whole southern district. The bakery, the forge, my shop. She looked at the name at the bottom. Beneficiary, Eleanor Swift and her heirs, in perpetuity. Isley, Flynn said, his voice dropping. Look at the witness signature. Isley looked. The ink was faded but legible. Witness, Silas Gable. Gable, Isley gasped. Mrs. Gable's grandfather. The Gables knew, Flynn said, anger edging his voice. They knew about the child. They knew about the land. They've known for 100 years that they were squatting on someone else's property. And they buried it, Isley realized, to keep the power. We found it, Flynn said. The smoking gun. Isley looked at the deed, then at Flynn. The intimacy of the firelight was gone, replaced by the cold, hard weight of history. The room felt suddenly very big and very cold. What do we do now? She whispered. Flynn looked at the deed. The firelight reflected in his eyes, making them look like burning coals. Now, he said, we find the heir. Chapter 10. The morning sun was blinding on the snow, a sharp, headache-inducing white that mocked their exhaustion. They had slept fitfully in the library, taking turns feeding the fire to keep the cold at bay. Now, with the plow having finally cleared the main road, a glorious rumbling sound at 6 a.m., they were back in Flynn's truck. The heater was blasting, but Isley still felt cold deep in her bones. She held the deed in her lap, smoothing the creases over and over. We need to trace the heir, Flynn said, typing on his phone with one hand while steering with the other. The signal was back, and he was already in investigator mode. Eleanor Swift moved to Oakhaven. Her daughter was born in 1896. Let's assume she stayed there. Census records again? Isley asked, rubbing her eyes. Or are we breaking into another basement? Ancestry.com is faster and less dusty. Flynn tapped the screen, scrolling through databases he probably paid a premium for. Eleanor Swift, Oakhaven. Daughter. Wait. He frowned. The truck swerved slightly as his attention shifted. What? Isley asked, leaning over the console. Eleanor Swift didn't have a daughter named Swift. She married in 1898 to a man named Miller. Miller? Isley sat up straighter. Miller is a common name. Half the valley is named Miller. Yes, but look at the daughter's name. Born 1896, listed as stepdaughter to Mr. Miller. Her name wasn't Miller. He pointed to a line on the screen. Clara Miller, born Clara Swift. Clara Miller, Isley repeated. The name felt familiar, like a song she had heard a long time ago in a room that smelled of lavender and old paper. A nursery rhyme. Clara Miller married, in 1918. Flynn scrolled, his thumb moving fast. To a man named Martin. Isley stopped breathing. The air in the truck seemed to vanish. The heater roar faded into a dull buzz. Martin? She whispered. John Martin, Flynn read. They had a son, Robert Martin, born 1920. My grandfather, Isley said. Her voice sounded tiny, distant, like it was coming from someone else. Robert was my grandfather. He kept the shop. He taught me calligraphy. Flynn slowly lowered the phone. He turned to look at her, his eyes wide, pupils blown. Isley. Clara, she said, memories flooding back, a soft lap, wrinkled hands, a voice humming. Grandma Clara? I thought she was my great-grandmother. She lived with us until she was 90. She used to sing songs about a secret prince in a valley. We thought it was just a fairy tale. She looked down at the deed in her hands. The paper felt heavy now, like lead. Beneficiary, Eleanor Swift and her heirs. "I'm the heir," she whispered. "I own the land." "You own the old mines," Flynn said, his voice rising with realization. "And the land behind the square. And, Isley, you own the land the written word sits on. You own a third of the town." Isley felt dizzy. The world tilted on its axis. She wasn't just a shopkeeper. She wasn't just the quiet girl who sold paper and hid in the back room. She was the descendant of the founder, the true descendant, blood of Elias Thorne. And she held the proof that could tear the town apart. "Oh, God," she said, pressing her hand to her mouth to hold back a sob. "Mrs. Gable, she knows. That's why she hates me. That's why she always watches the shop." "The Gables knew all along," Flynn said, anger darkening his face. "That's why they've been running this town for 50 years. Silas Gable witnessed the deed. He knew the real claim belonged to the Swifts, to you, and they kept quiet to keep control. They stole your inheritance." "If this gets out," Isley started. "If this gets out," Flynn said, his voice hard, "it's the story of the century. The ousted heir, the secret lineage, the corruption of the council, justice being served after 100 years. He looked at the deed. He looked at Isley. "Isley, we have them. We have everything. We can take them down." Isley looked at the excitement in his eyes, the hunger, the thrill of the kill. She felt a wave of nausea. "Wait," she said. "I need to call Sarah." "Who? My producer?" "No, Sarah, my college roommate. She's a property lawyer in Boston. A shark." Isley pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking so hard she dropped it once before dialing. "Isley?" Sarah answered on the second ring. "This is a surprise. Are you getting sued? Did you finally punch Mrs. Gable?" "Hypothetically," Isley said, her voice tight. "Sarah, hypothetically. If someone found a deed, an old one, predating a town's incorporation, and it proved the original land transfer was invalid." "Whoa," Sarah laughed, but the humor vanished quickly. "That's not hypothetical. That's a nightmare. Why? What would happen if that deed surfaced in a town like mine?" Sarah's voice turned professional, cold. "The moment a credible claim is filed, title insurance gets pulled. Every property transaction freezes. Banks won't issue mortgages on contested land. Construction stops. Developers pull out because the liability is toxic. You're talking about a complete economic freeze. Litigation would take years, 3 to 5 minimum, maybe 10. "And the businesses?" Isley asked, looking at the town square outside her window as they drove through Main Street. "The small businesses? The bakery? The forge?" "They'd bleed out," Sarah said bluntly. "They can't get loans. They can't sell. If their lease is on contested land, they might be evicted. It's a bomb, Isley. Why? Did you find pirate treasure?" "No," Isley lied, closing her eyes. "Just research for a book. Thanks, Sarah." She hung up. She looked at Flynn. "Did you hear that?" she asked. "I heard it," Flynn said. "It's disruption. Disruption is the price of truth. It's painful, but it's necessary." "It's not disruption, Flynn. It's death. 3 to 5 years? This town survives season to season. If the banks freeze us out, Valentine's Verge is gone. The bakery, the forge, my shop, gone. We can't survive a legal war." "But it's yours," Flynn argued. "It's your land. You can save it. You can be the benevolent landlord." "By destroying it first?" She shook her head. "We can't run this story." "It is the truth." "It's a bomb!" Isley shouted, clutching the deed. And I won't drop it on my neighbors. I won't be the one who kills this town. She opened the door as the truck slowed at the stop sign near her shop. Isley, wait! No, she said, tears hot in her eyes. You promised, Flynn. You promised we wouldn't hurt the town. I promised we wouldn't run gossip. This is justice. This is your birthright. It's destruction, and I don't want it. She jumped out of the truck. She ran to her shop, fumbling with her keys, slipping on the ice. Flynn didn't follow her. She locked the door behind her, sliding the bolt home with a finality that echoed in her chest. She slid down to the floor, clutching the deed to her chest. She was the heir to Valentine's Verge, and she had never felt more alone. Chapter 11. Flynn looked at the deed. It was yellowed, brittle, and innocent-looking. Just a piece of paper. But the words on it were a nuclear bomb. I, Elias Thorne, do hereby bequeath the entirety of the Valley lands to Eleanor Swift and her heirs. He didn't think. It was instinct, the honed reflex of a decade in journalism, the muscle memory of a man who lived to document the things people wanted hidden. He pulled out his phone. He snapped a photo. Click. The sound was deafening in the quiet homestead library, like a gunshot in a cathedral. Isley flinched. She looked up from the document, her eyes wide, still glimmering with the tears of her discovery. She looked at his phone, then at his face. The trust in her eyes cracked. "What did you just do?" she whispered. "Documentation," Flynn said. He felt a spike of adrenaline, the familiar rush of the scoop. It was a physical high. "Isley, do you realize what this is? It proves the corporate council is illegitimate. It proves the town belongs to you. This is the smoking gun." "Delete it." Her voice wasn't scared. It was cold. A sudden drop in temperature that froze the air between them. Flynn paused. "What?" "Delete the photo, Flynn. Right now." "Isley, be rational. This is the story. This is the truth. The town of Love was built on stolen land. Elias didn't own it when he sold the rights to the developers. It was Eleanor's. It was stolen from your family." "It's not a story!" She stood up, the blanket falling from her shoulders to puddle on the floor. She looked fierce, like a protectress statue come to life. "It's an eviction notice. You heard Sarah. If you publish this, the council will freeze every asset in town. The festival will be canceled. The shops will close while the lawyers fight over who owns the dirt under the foundations. You'll bankrupt us." "The system is corrupt," Flynn argued, stepping closer, needing her to see it. "You can't build a community on a lie. If you hide this, you're no better than the people who buried Eleanor's name. You're complicit." "I am protecting my home." Isley stepped between him and the door, though she looked small against his height. Her hands were balled into fists. "You talk about truth like it's a god, Flynn. But truth without care is just cruelty. It's just gossip with a footnote. You don't care about the people. You care about the byline." "It's not gossip. It's history. And history deserves to be known." "It's my history, and you're stealing it." She pointed a trembling finger at his phone. "You promised. You said we were partners. You said nothing gets published without my say." "I said I wouldn't publish rumors," Flynn corrected, his own defense rising, sharp and defensive. "This is fact. This is legal proof of theft, and I have a duty." "To who? Your producer? Your ratings?" Isley laughed, a harsh, jagged sound that hurt to hear. "Don't pretend this is noble. This isn't about justice. This is your ticket back to the big leagues. You found your scandal. Congratulations. You won." She looked at him with such profound disappointment that Flynn felt it like a physical blow. It was worse than anger. It was pity. She looked at him like he was small. Isley. He reached for her, wanting to explain, wanting to bridge the gap. She flinched back as if he had burned her. Don't. Just decide. Right now. Are you Flynn the investigator, or are you the man I sat by the fire with last night? Flynn looked at his phone. He looked at the photo of the deed. If he deleted it, he went back to New York empty-handed. He failed. Sarah would cut him. His career would stall. He would just be another podcaster spinning wheels. If he kept it, he had the story of the year. He won. But he lost her. He looked at Isley. She was waiting. He couldn't delete it. He physically couldn't. It was too big. It was the truth. And Flynn Hawthorne served the truth. I need to think, he said roughly. I can't just erase it. It exists. Isley nodded slowly. The light in her eyes went out. The door slammed shut. Then you have your answer, she said. She turned her back on him. She walked to the fireplace and picked up the deed. She put it back in the hidden compartment. She closed the panel. Click. Go, she said to the fire. Isley, we can work this out. We can frame it. Go, Flynn. Before I say something I can't take back. Before I hate you. Flynn stood there for a long moment. He wanted to fight. He wanted to argue. But the silence wasn't companionable anymore. It was a wall. A stone wall built on a foundation of betrayal. He turned and walked out. He walked through the snow to his truck. He got in. He picked up his phone. But those were lies. If he drove away with the photo, he was leaving her. And time wouldn't fix the fundamental crack between who he was and who she needed him to be. Damn it, he whispered. He threw his phone on the passenger seat. It stared at him, black and accusatory. He drove down the mountain. The road was treacherous, but he drove fast. He didn't stop at the B&B to pack properly. He'd have the rest sent. He needed to be moving. He needed the noise of the highway to drown out the look in her eyes. He drove past the Welcome to Valentine's Verge sign. He needed space. He needed to think. He needed to hear himself think over the sound of his own heart breaking. He hit the highway and turned south, toward the city, toward the noise, toward the life he thought he wanted. And as the miles stretched out behind him, he realized the silence in the cab wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. He had the biggest scoop of his career in his pocket, and he felt like he'd just been robbed. Chapter 12. The bell above the door of the written word didn't ring. It had been 3 days. Isley sat at her counter. The ledger was open, but she wasn't counting inventory. She was counting hours. 72 hours since the library. 72 hours since the photo. 72 hours since Flynn drove out of town. Flynn was gone. His truck was gone from the bakery lot. Mrs. Gable had confirmed with entirely too much satisfaction that Mr. Hawthorne had checked out in a hurry, leaving behind a half-used bottle of shampoo and a suspicious lack of gratitude. Isley looked at her phone. It sat on the glass counter like a bomb waiting to detonate. Every notification made her jump. Every buzz made her stomach drop. She checked the cold truth feed. Last episode, the Vermont mystery. Teaser. Nothing new. Yet. But it was coming. She knew it. He had the photo. He had the ambition. She had seen the look in his eyes, the hunger. It was the same look a wolf gave a rabbit right before the snap. "You're an idiot," she whispered to herself. "You let the wolf in. You invited him to tea." She stood up and walked to the window. The town was busy. Tourists were flooding in for the upcoming First Letter Festival. Couples walked hand in hand, taking selfies by the statue of Elias Thorne. The statue of a fraud. The statue of her great-grandfather, the man who had abandoned her great-grandmother to madness and silence. If Flynn ran the story, that statue would be a laughingstock. The headlines would be brutal. Valentine's Verge, the town built on theft. The founder's secret shame. Isley felt a wave of nausea. She had failed. She was the keeper of the secrets. A self-appointed title maybe, but one she took seriously. And she had handed the biggest secret of all to the enemy. The door opened. Isley flinched, her heart leaping into her throat. It was just Hallie. Hallie looked exhausted, her hair frizzy from the humidity of the chocolate shop next door. She carried 2 coffees and a bag of croissants. "You look like death," Hallie said cheerfully, setting a cup down. "Drink this. It has enough caffeine to jumpstart a tractor. And eat a carb. You're fading away." "Thanks," Isley murmured, wrapping her hands around the cup. The warmth didn't reach her fingers. "So," Hallie hopped onto a stool, swinging her legs. "Where's the shadowy investigator? I haven't seen him lurking at Cupid's Cocoa stealing Wi-Fi." "He left," Isley said. She tried to keep her voice steady, but it cracked on the word left. "Back to New York." "Oh," Hallie's cheer faltered. She looked closely at Isley. "Oh, Eyes, did he say goodbye?" "We had a disagreement." "About the story?" "About everything." Isley gripped the warm cup. "He found something, Hal. Something bad. And I think he's going to use it." Hallie frowned. "He seemed into you. Like, really into you. I saw the way he looked at you at the library the other day. Like you were a rare manuscript." "He's a journalist, Hallie. He looks at everyone like they're a puzzle to solve. Once he solved me, he moved on." "I don't believe that," Hallie said fiercely. "I'm a good judge of character, even if Rowan says I'm too optimistic. Flynn had eyes. Soft eyes." "He has shark eyes," Isley corrected. "Dead shark eyes." "Well, if he hurts you, Rose has a blowtorch," Hallie said, taking a vicious bite of her croissant. "And I have a clipboard. We are deadly." Isley managed a weak smile. "I'll keep that in mind." Hallie left eventually, pulled away by a crisis involving the ice sculptures melting too fast. Isley locked the door behind her. She flipped the sign to closed. She went to the back room. She started packing. Not her clothes. The archives. She took the boxes of letters, Eleanor's letters, and began wrapping them in acid-free tissue. If the story broke, the media would descend. They would want to see the evidence. They would tear her shop apart looking for the proof. She needed to move them. Maybe to Rose's forge, maybe to the old mine shaft, anywhere but here. She picked up the quill Flynn had used to sign the guest book weeks ago. She touched the feather. It was soft. She almost texted him. Her thumb hovered over his name in her contacts. "Please don't. Please come back. I miss you." She deleted the words. She couldn't beg. Begging admitted defeat. And she was Eleanor Swift's great-granddaughter. She didn't beg. She endured. She survived in the silence. She put the phone down. She waited. The silence in the shop stretched out, heavy and suffocating. It was the silence of holding your breath underwater, waiting to see if you would surface or drown. Chapter 13. Flynn sat in his apartment in Brooklyn. It was a shoebox with exposed brick wall that real estate agents called charming and he called dust generating. But the rent was astronomical, which meant he was successful. The cursor blinked on his laptop screen, a steady, rhythmic pulse. Blink, blink, blink. The town built on lies. Draft 1. He had written the opening paragraph 3 times. He had deleted it 3 times. He took a sip of whiskey. It was the expensive stuff, 20-year-old single malt. But tonight it tasted like solvent. It burned on the way down, stripping the lining of his throat, but it didn't numb the noise in his head. "Come on," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "It's just a story. You've written 1,000 stories. Write the lead." In the quiet valley of Valentine's Verge, the romance is manufactured, but the corruption is organic. Backspace, backspace, backspace. Too flowery, too cliché. He tried again. They call it the town of love. But the legal documents tell a story of theft, betrayal, and a century-long cover-up that has kept the powerful in charge and the rightful heirs in the dark. Better, sharper. It had teeth. He looked at the photo on his phone. The deed, the smoking gun, the yellowed parchment with the damning signature of Silas Gable. It was everything he had been looking for. It was the scoop that would get him back on prime time. It was the old Flynn vindication, the proof that he hadn't lost his edge, that he was still the predator who could smell blood in the water. So why did he feel like he was choking? He picked up his phone. He opened the Photos app. He didn't look at the deed. He scrolled back. There was a photo of Isley in the archives, her hair falling out of her bun, pointing at a map with ink-stained fingers. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking at the history. She looked fierce, protective. The light from the dusty window caught the curve of her cheek. He scrolled again. A photo of the snowstorm from the library window at the Thorne homestead, the firelight reflecting in the glass. He closed his eyes. He could still hear her voice in the truck, cutting through the heater's hum. Truth without care is just cruelty. And then the phone call with Sarah. 3 to 5 years of litigation. The town goes bankrupt. Flynn stood up and paced the small room. He was a journalist. His job was to expose the rot. If the town was built on a lie, it deserved to crumble. That was the philosophy. That was the gig. You shine the light and the roaches scatter. You don't worry about where the roaches go. But he kept seeing Mrs. Gable arranging flowers with surprisingly gentle hands. He kept seeing Rose welding in her forge, sparks flying like fireworks. He kept seeing Isley's shop, smelling of lavender and peace, a sanctuary against the digital world. If he ran this, he wasn't just exposing a council. He was evicting Isley. He was destroying the very thing she had trusted him to help her understand. He was taking her heritage, which she had just discovered, and turning it into a weapon against her home. "Damn it," he whispered, kicking the leg of his desk. His phone buzzed on the mahogany surface. An email from Marcus. Subject, deadline. "Flynn, I need the assets. Legal is ready to move. We have a slot on the morning briefing. Don't ghost me. This is the comeback, remember?" Flynn looked at the email. Then he looked at the blank document. He opened his notes app. He looked at the last note she had written him, the one she slipped under his door at the B&B. He had taken a picture of it before he left because he was pathetic. Ink doesn't stutter, but sometimes it hesitates. He was hesitating. For 10 years he had never hesitated. He had burned bridges, sources, and friendships for the truth. He had sacrificed relationships, sleep, and peace of mind on the altar of the story. Was it worth it? He really looked at his empty apartment, at the accolades on the shelf that gathered dust, at the silence that wasn't peaceful like the valley, but hollow. Isley had silence too, but hers was full. Hers was a choice. Hers was filled with the scratch of a nib, the smell of paper, the history of 1,000 loves. His was just lonely. He made a decision. It didn't feel like a lightning strike. It felt like a stone dropping into a deep well, heavy, final. He didn't type a lead. He opened his email. He hit reply to Marcus. "I'll have the update for you tomorrow, in person." He closed the laptop with a snap. He wasn't going to email the photo. He needed to look them in the eye when he did this. He needed to see if they were human, or if they were just algorithms in suits. Or maybe he just needed to see if he was still human. He grabbed his keys. He grabbed the piece of expensive stationery he had bought on impulse at a shop in the village that reminded him of hers. Cream-laid paper, cotton content high enough to feel like fabric. He didn't know what he was going to write on it yet. But he knew one thing. He was done with the noise. He packed a bag, just the essentials. He didn't know if he was coming back. As he walked out the door, he left the whiskey bottle on the counter. He wouldn't need it where he was going. Or maybe he would need something stronger. He walked out of the building into the Brooklyn night. The sirens wailed, a constant, dissonant choir. "Shut up," he told the city. He got in his truck. He turned the key. The engine roared, drowning out the sirens. He had a meeting to get to, and then he had a letter to write. Chapter 14. New York City was a scream. After the quiet of the valley, the noise was physical. It assaulted Flynn from every angle. Sirens, horns, the constant hum of 1,000,000 air conditioners, the aggressive shouting of pedestrians who seemed to be angry just for the sport of it. Flynn sat in the conference room on the 42nd floor. It was glass-walled, sleek, and expensive. It overlooked the city he used to think was the center of the universe. Now, it just looked like a circuit board. Cold, electric, and unfeeling. "Flynn!" Marcus Vane slammed his hand on the mahogany table, shattering Flynn's reverie. "Earth to Flynn! Are you with us, or are you still hibernating in the boonies?" Flynn blinked. He looked at the faces around the table. Marcus, his producer, wearing a suit that cost more than Flynn's truck. Sharon, the network exec, whose smile never quite reached her eyes. 2 lawyers, generic and gray, checking their watches. "Sorry," Flynn said, straightening in his chair. "Jet lag." "You drove from Vermont," Marcus pointed out, drumming his fingers. "That's not jet lag. That's hesitation. Do we have the assets or not? The legal team is practically drooling." "The assets," Flynn repeated. The words tasted like ash. "The deed," Sharon said, her voice sharp, cutting through the pleasantries. "The smoking gun. You voiced the teaser perfectly. The town built on a lie. We have a slot on the primetime lineup tonight. We need to tease the visual. We need the proof." Flynn reached into his pocket. He felt his phone. It was warm against his thigh. The photo was there. One tap. He could airplay it to the screen right now. He could project Eleanor Swift's stolen legacy onto the 80-inch 4K display. "It's huge, Flynn," Marcus said, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming with the reflected city lights. "I'm talking syndication. I'm talking a docuseries. The Lie of Love. We tear down the romance industry. It's cynical, it's timely, it's perfect. The internet loves a takedown." Global, Sharon confirmed. We have interest from the streaming platforms, provided the evidence holds up. Does it hold up? It holds up, Flynn said quietly. It's undeniable. A transfer of deed witnessed by the current mayor's grandfather. It invalidates the entire corporate ownership of the valley. Boom! Marcus clapped his hands. Gold mine! We'll have lawsuits flying by Monday. The ratings will be astronomical. Then show us, Sharon commanded. Flynn pulled his phone out. He unlocked it. He looked at the thumbnail. The yellowed paper. Eleanor Swift. If he showed them this, he won. He got the contract renewal. He got the fame. He got the noise back. He would be the king of truth again. But he would lose the quiet. He thought of Isley. He thought of her hands, stained with ink, trembling as she held the diary. He thought of her fierceness when she stood between him and the door of the library. Truth without care is cruelty. He looked at Marcus. If we run this, the town goes under, right? The title freeze alone will bankrupt the small businesses. Who cares? Marcus laughed, dismissing the thought with a wave of his hand. It's a tourist trap. It sells overpriced hot chocolate and lies. It deserves to go under. That's capitalism, baby. And the people? Flynn asked. The woman who runs the bakery, the blacksmith, the stationery shop owner. They're background extras, Flynn. They're color commentary for the tragic B-roll. We'll get some shots of them looking sad in the snow. It adds texture. Flynn looked at the room. These people didn't care. They didn't know what it felt like to fix a rotting floorboard or preserve a piece of history because it mattered. They didn't know what it felt like to read a letter written by a ghost and feel the grief in the ink. They were acoustic foam. They absorbed everything and felt nothing. Flynn looked at the photo. Are you Flynn the investigator? Or are you the man I sat by the fire with? Isley had asked him to choose. I can't do it, he said. What? Marcus stopped laughing. The room went deadly silent. I can't run it. Why? Is it fake? Did you get played? Sharon asked, her eyes narrowing. No, it's real. It's the most real thing I've ever found. But it's not a story. Flynn stood up. It's a life. It's her life. And it belongs to her, not to us. Not to the content machine. Flynn, sit down, Sharon warned, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. If you walk out on this, you're breaching your contract. We own the story. We paid for the trip. So sue me. We will. And we'll blacklist you. You'll never work in media again. I'll make sure you can't get a job writing obituaries for a penny saver. Flynn looked at the sharks. He looked at the glass walls. Good, he said, and he meant it. I'm sick of the noise anyway. He looked down at his phone. He selected the photo. Isley's legacy. Or Isley's weapon. Delete. Are you sure you want to permanently delete this item? His thumb hovered. This was his career. This was 10 years of work. This was his identity. He looked at Marcus's confused, angry face. He pressed yes. The screen flashed. Gone. What did you do? Marcus whispered, horrified. I killed the story, Flynn said. He felt a weight lift off his chest, a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying for a decade. The crushing pressure of being Flynn Hawthorne evaporated. There is no deed. There is no fraud. Just a small town trying to survive. Find another tragedy to monetize, Marcus. Get out, Sharon hissed. Gladly. Flynn walked to the door. He felt light. He felt untethered. Flynn! Marcus yelled. Where are you going? You're walking away from millions! Flynn didn't look back. He pushed through the glass doors, leaving fingerprints on the pristine surface. "I'm going to buy some stationery," he said. He walked out of the building. He walked into the street. The wind was cold, biting through his jacket, but it felt clean. It didn't smell like recycled air and ambition anymore. He had no job. He had no apartment. He had burned his life down in 5 minutes flat. He checked his bank account. He had enough gas money to get back to Vermont, and maybe enough for a month's rent at the Love Nest if Mrs. Gable didn't skin him alive. That was all he needed. He got into his truck. He tossed his phone on the passenger seat. "North," he said to the GPS. And for the first time in years, he wasn't chasing a story. He was chasing a future. Chapter 15. The drive back felt longer than the drive down, even though Flynn was speeding. The adrenaline of the boardroom exit had faded somewhere around Connecticut, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. He had done the noble thing. He had killed the story, but that didn't mean Isley would forgive him. He had still stolen the photo. He had still left. He parked in front of the written word. It was dark. The town was asleep, buried under a fresh layer of snow that made everything look soft and forgivable. He sat in his truck for a long time, watching the shop. He had a plan. Sort of. He had a letter. He picked it up from the seat. It was written on the expensive paper he'd bought in the city. His handwriting was terrible, jagged scrawl compared to Isley's elegance, but the words were his. He hadn't used a spell check. He hadn't drafted it. He had just written. He got out of the truck. The cold hit him like a physical blow, grounding him. He walked to the door. Locked, obviously. He knocked. The sound echoed in the empty street. Nothing. "Isley," he said through the glass. "I know you're in there. I know you're packing. I saw the boxes." He saw a shadow move in the back. A hesitation. Isley came to the door. She looked wrecked. Dark circles under her eyes, hair a disaster that defied physics. She was wearing a sweater that was too big for her, the sleeves pulled down over her hands. She didn't open the door. She just stared at him through the glass. Her expression wasn't happy. It wasn't even relieved. It was wary. Like she was looking at a stranger who might be selling encyclopedias or bad news. "Go away," she mouthed. "No," Flynn said. He held the letter up to the glass. She squinted. She saw the header. Resignation. She paused. Her eyes scanned the text through the pane. Slowly, undone by curiosity or maybe just exhaustion, she unlocked the door. She opened it a crack, keeping the chain on. "What is this?" she asked. Her voice was scratchy, unused. "It's my resignation," Flynn said. "I quit. I deleted the photo, Isley. The network doesn't have it. Nobody has it. It's gone. Scrubbed." Isley looked at him. She didn't throw the door open. She didn't hug him. She didn't cry. "You quit?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because you were right. Truth without care is just cruelty. And I didn't want to be cruel. Not to you." Isley looked at the letter. Then she looked past him at his truck, packed with his bags. "You have no job." "Nope. Unemployed. Blacklisted, actually. Sharon was very specific about the blacklisting." "You have nowhere to sleep." "I have a truck. It has a heater. Mostly." "You broke my trust," she said. The words were quiet, but they hit him like a hammer. "I know," Flynn said. "I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix the hole in the wall, Flynn. You came in here. You made me feel safe. You made me feel seen. and then you turned me into a headline. You looked at my life and saw a paycheck. I can't just forget that. I'm not asking you to forget it, Flynn said, stepping closer to the gap in the door. I'm asking for a chance to earn it back. I'm asking for a probationary period. How? We fix the deed, he said. We verify it. We secure it. Not as a secret, but as history. We tell the story your way, the true way. We protect the town, but we honor Eleanor. Isley hesitated. The keeper of secrets part of her was interested. The woman part of her was still hurt. You want to help me hide it? I want to help you protect it. There's a difference. She looked at him. She was calculating, measuring his sincerity against his history. I don't trust you, she said finally. Fair. But I can't move the safe by myself, and I have heavy boxes of archives that need to go to the basement. Flynn nodded. I can lift heavy things. I'm very useful for manual labor. And you know how to talk to lawyers if this goes sideways. Sarah scares me sometimes. I speak Shark. It's my native tongue. She let out a breath. She closed the door to undo the chain. Then she opened it wide. You can come in, she said, but you're sleeping on the couch in the back room, and you're not allowed to touch the ink or the good paper. Deal. Flynn stepped inside. The smell of lavender and old paper hit him. It felt like coming home. It felt like oxygen. But as Isley locked the door behind him, sliding the bolt home with a click, he knew he wasn't home yet. He was a guest on very thin ice. So, she said, crossing her arms and leaning against the counter. What's the plan, unemployed man? First, Flynn said, taking off his jacket and tossing it onto a chair. We need to break into the archives. For the first time in days, a spark of interest lit up her eyes. A tiny, dangerous spark. The archives? Tonight? If we file the deed under Eleanor's name, it's official. It proves she existed. But if we file it in the wrong year, nobody finds it unless they know where to look. It becomes a sleeping dragon. Isley smiled. It was a small, sharp smile, the smile of an accomplice. A heist, she said. A heist, Flynn agreed. Into the most dangerous basement in Vermont. Okay, Isley said. I have hats. She reached under the counter and pulled out 2 black beanies. She tossed one to him. This doesn't mean I forgive you, she warned, pointing a finger at him. I'm just using you for your criminal energy. I know, Flynn said, putting the hat on. It was tight. I'll work on the forgiveness. I'm playing the long game now. Start driving, she said, grabbing her coat. We have history to rewrite. Chapter 16. The town archives were located in the basement of the town hall. It was ironic, Flynn thought, that the history of Valentine's Verge was buried directly underneath the people currently lying about it. The literal foundation of the town was a vault of secrets. It was 11 p.m. The square was deserted, the statue of Elias Thorne casting a long, accusing shadow across the snow. Flynn adjusted his black beanie. You sure about the alarm? Because if I get arrested for burglary right after quitting my job, my mother will never let me hear the end of it. Mrs. Gable knits on Tuesdays, Isley whispered, pulling on her own hat. She looked like a cat burglar who specialized in stealing library books. She sets the alarm code to 1895, the year of the founding, but she always leaves the side door unlatched for the cleaning crew on Wednesdays. It's a systemic vulnerability I've been meaning to report, but now I'm glad I didn't. You sound like a spy. A very parochial spy. I listen to your podcast, she retorted. I know how sources work. She pushed the side door. It clicked open. Bingo, Flynn whispered. They slipped inside. The hallway smelled of floor wax, bureaucracy, and the faint, lingering scent of Mrs. Gable's floral perfume. They moved silently down the stairs to the basement records room. Isley used her key, she was, after all, the town's semi-official historian, to open the records door. Row upon row of filing cabinets stretched out in the gloom, metal monoliths holding the mundane details of a century. Okay, Isley said, clicking on a pen light. The beam cut through the dust. Land records, Section G for Gable. Why Gable? Because Silas Gable was the witness. If he filed it under his own authority to bury it. Or... She moved to another cabinet, her fingers trailing over the metal. Section S. Swift. She opened the drawer. It squeaked, a high, metallic screech that sounded like a dying violin. They both froze. Clack! A sound from the top of the stairs. A door opening. Flynn grabbed Isley's arm, his grip instinctively protective. Someone's here. It's Tuesday, Isley hissed, panic edging her voice. Nobody is here on Tuesday. Review your intel, Flynn muttered. He looked around. There was nowhere to go. The aisles were narrow, dead ends. Humming. A soft, tuneless melody drifted down the stairwell, accompanied by the heavy thud drag of orthopedic shoes. Mrs. Gable, Isley breathed, horrified. She must have forgotten something. The footsteps started descending. Flynn pulled Isley back, shoving her into the narrow gap between the town ordinances 1950 to 1960 and the wall. He crowded in front of her, using his broader frame to shield her from the line of sight of the doorway. It was tight. Isley's back was pressed against the cold cinder block. Flynn's chest was mere inches from her face. She could smell the cold air clinging to his jacket and the faint scent of coffee. Shh, he breathed, his lips brushing her forehead. Isley's heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked up at him. In the sliver of light from the street lamp outside the high basement window, his eyes were focused, intense, not scared, capable. The door to the records room creaked open. The overhead lights flickered on. Flynn winced, shrinking back into the shadows. Mrs. Gable walked in. She was wearing a violently purple tracksuit. She bustled over to a cabinet on the far side, Section P. Potluck schedules, she muttered to herself. I know I filed the ambrosia salad recipe in here. Isley squeezed her eyes shut. If Mrs. Gable looked left, they were dead. Well, not dead, but grounded. Or publicly shamed, which was worse. Flynn didn't move. He held perfectly still, his breathing shallow. One of his hands found Isley's in the dark and squeezed it. I've got you. Mrs. Gable rummaged. Files slapped against each other. Aha! No marshmallows, I knew it! She slammed the drawer shut. She turned. Get out, get out, get out, Isley chanted mentally. Mrs. Gable paused. She sniffed the air. Pine, she murmured. And cheap cologne? Flynn stiffened. Isley stifled a hysterical giggle. It wasn't cheap cologne. It was expensive body wash. Mrs. Gable took a step toward their aisle. Flynn tightened his grip on Isley's hand. He shifted his weight, ready to step out and take the blame if she came around the corner. But then, Mrs. Gable's phone rang. The ringtone was strict and piercing. Harold! She barked into the phone, turning back to the door. Yes, I found the salad recipe. No, I did not authorize the sprinkles. I'm coming up. She clicked the lights off. Darkness rushed back in, safe and velvety. The door closed. The heavy footsteps retreated. The exterior door slammed. Isley let out a breath that was half sob. Her knees buckled. Flynn caught her, his arms wrapping around her waist to steady her. "Pine and cheap cologne," Isley whispered into his chest. "You're slipping, Hawthorne." "It's forest mist," he defended, his voice rough with relief. He didn't let go. "And you smell like old paper and vanilla. It's distinct." They stood there for a beat too long. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a charged electric awareness. He was holding her. They were alone in the dark. Isley pulled back gently. The deed. Right. Flynn cleared his throat, stepping back. The deed. They moved back to the cabinet. Isley found the folder labeled Historical Curiosities, 1890 to 1900. "This is the miscellaneous file," she explained, her hand still trembling slightly. "It's where we put things that don't fit the narrative but are too interesting to throw away." She held up the deed, the original, brittle paper. "If we file this here," Flynn said, taking it from her, "it looks like it's been here for 100 years. Just a curiosity, a piece of paper." He slipped the deed into the folder, right between a receipt for a town bell and a menu from the 1899 Founders' Dinner. "It's a sleeping dragon," Flynn said. "We're not waking it up. We're just making sure it has teeth if we need it." Isley closed the drawer. Scritch. "It's done," she whispered. Flynn looked at her. "Ready to make a break for it? Before she comes back for the napkins?" "Ready." They crept out of the archives, checking every corner. When they finally burst out of the side door into the cool night air, Isley felt a giddy, bubbling laughter rise in her throat. "We made it," she gasped. "Accomplices," Flynn grinned, adjusting her beanie. "Now, about my payment." "Payment?" "I was promised pancakes, and I seem to recall a 24-hour diner on Route 9. Isley smiled. "I'm driving. Your cologne leaves a trail." "Deal." Flynn took her hand as they walked to her car. He didn't check over his shoulder. He didn't look for an angle. He just walked beside her, matching her stride. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like a fresh page. Chapter 17. The studio was makeshift. Studio was a generous word for the back corner of Rose's forge basement, partitioned off by heavy moving blankets to dampen the sound of the hammers upstairs. But it had power. It had heat. And thanks to Rose, it had a very sturdy lock on the door. Flynn adjusted the mic arm. He checked his levels on the laptop. The waveform danced green and steady on the screen. He put on his headphones. The world narrowed down to the sound of his own breath and the faint hum of the server tower in the corner. This was it. No network. No producer screaming in his ear. No sponsors demanding shock value. Just him, a microphone, and the truth. He looked across the small table. Isley was sitting there. She was wearing her favorite oversized sweater, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea to keep them from shaking. She looked terrified. "You don't have to speak," Flynn said gently, lowering his headphones for a second. "I can do the narration. You just be here. Moral support." Isley took a deep breath. She set the mug down. "No," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. "It's my story. Or my family's. I should help tell it." Flynn smiled. "Okay, just pretend it's just us, like in the library, talking by the fire. Ignore the recording light." He hit record. The red light blinked on the console. "Welcome to the Silent Founder," Flynn said. His voice was deep, smooth, the voice that had garnered him millions of downloads, but stripped of the cynical edge. "I'm Flynn Hawthorne, and for a long time, I thought I knew what a story was. I thought it was about secrets exposed, about the noise you make when you break something." He paused. "I was wrong. Sometimes the loudest stories are the ones that are never spoken, the ones written in ink and hidden in walls, the ones about sacrifice." He looked at Isley. She nodded. "We grew up with the legend of Elias Thorne," Isley said. Her voice was soft, slightly husky, perfect for audio. "The man who built a town on love. But love isn't a foundation you build with bricks. It's a choice you make every day." Flynn guided the narrative. They wove the tale together, not of a scandalous affair, but of a heartbreaking agreement. They read excerpts from the letters, their voices blending. They talked about Eleanor's decision to give up her claim so the town could thrive. They talked about Elias's regret. They talked about the sleeping dragon of the deed, now resting peacefully in the archives. It wasn't a sensational exposé. It was an elegy. It was a love letter to the messy, complicated past. When they finished 40 minutes later, the silence in the basement felt heavy and holy. Flynn hit stop. "We did it," he said. Isley let out a long breath and slumped back in her chair. "I didn't stutter." "You were perfect," Flynn said. "You were absolute magic." He uploaded the file. He hit publish. It went out into the ether. 2 hours later, they walked out of the forge and into the crisp afternoon air. The town seemed different. People were walking down the street with headphones on. In Cupid's Cocoa, the radio was playing the podcast instead of the usual top 40. Mrs. Gable was standing outside the love nest, sweeping the steps. When she saw Isley and Flynn, she stopped. She leaned on her broom. Isley tensed, waiting for the wrath. Mrs. Gable watched them approach. Her eyes, usually sharp with judgment, were misty. She dabbed at them with a lace handkerchief. "I always wondered," Mrs. Gable said. Her voice was thick. "My mother used to say Eleanor was the best seamstress in the valley. She made my christening gown. I still have it." Isley blinked. "She did?" "We thought she left because she hated us," Mrs. Gable said. She looked at the statue in the square. "To think, she gave us everything. She gave us the land we're standing on." She looked at Isley. "You have her eyes, dear. I never noticed before." Isley's throat worked. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable." "You two come by for tea," Mrs. Gable said, briskly returning to her sweeping, clearly embarrassed by the display of emotion. "I want to hear more about those letters. And bring that young man. Make sure he eats something. He looks thin." They walked on. Hallie ran out of the hearth, waving her phone. "Isley, oh my God, I'm crying at work. I'm melting the spreadsheets." Rose emerged from the basement stairs, covered in soot, grinning. "My shop traffic just doubled. Everyone wants rose gold because you mentioned the mine where it comes from. I'm going to be rich. Drinks are on me tonight." The town hadn't shattered. It hadn't imploded. It had shifted, settled deeper into its own roots. The lie was gone, replaced by a truth that was sadder but stronger. Flynn stopped in the middle of the square. He looked around. "It worked," he said, sounding stunned. "People like a love story," Isley said. "I like a love story," Flynn said. He turned to her. "I think I'm starting to like this one in particular." He stepped closer. The town, the people, the podcast. It all faded away. A local paper needs a lot of stationery, Isley noted. I know a place, Flynn said. Great owner, terrible business hours, but she makes good ink. He reached out and took her hand. It was simple. It was public. And for the first time, Isley didn't pull away. Chapter 18. The first letter festival was usually a chaotic affair, involving too much pink crepe paper and a desperate amount of glitter. But this year, the vibe was different. It was the Saturday after the podcast dropped. The town square was packed, but it wasn't the frantic commercial energy of years past. There was a hush over the crowd, a reverent, curious buzz. Isley stood in the doorway of the written word, watching. Flynn had told the story of Eleanor and Elias, and the town had listened. Really listened. Instead of just buying the pre-printed Be Mine cards, people were flocking to the long tables set up in the square. They were writing real letters. Long letters. Isley saw a teenage girl writing furiously, wiping away tears. She saw an old man holding a pen with a shaking hand, pausing to look up at the statue of Elias Thorne, which now had a new plaque leaning against its base. And Eleanor Swift, the silent founder. It's mayhem, Hallie said, appearing beside Isley with a clipboard that looked ready to snap. Good mayhem, but mayhem. We ran out of stamps an hour ago. Rose is forging, literally forging, commemorative coins in the basement because people want souvenirs that aren't plastic hearts. It's beautiful, Isley said softly. They aren't just here for the romance. They're here for the history. They're here for your history. Flynn's voice came from behind her. Isley turned. Flynn was leaning against the doorframe. He looked tired. He'd been recording follow-up segments all week, but he looked happy, in a way she hadn't seen before. He held up a coffee cup. Black, no sugar. I'm learning. I take it with 1 sugar, Isley corrected, taking the cup. Damn, I'll get it right eventually. He watched the crowd. Mrs. Gable is holding court over by the fountain. She's telling everyone she knew the truth all along. It's a complete lie, but she's telling it with such conviction I almost believe her. She's allowed, Isley smiled. She's the guardian of the myth. Myths evolve. And what about you? Flynn asked, his gaze dropping to meet hers. How does the guardian of the truth feel? Light, Isley admitted. She looked at the statue, then at the busy shop, then at him. I feel unburdened, like I don't have to carry the weight of the mountain anymore. The moment hung between them, fragile and full of promise. But then a tourist with a giant camera barged up to the door. Excuse me, are you the descendants? Can we get a selfie? Flynn laughed, stepping back. Duty calls. I'll be at the forge if you need a bodyguard. By March, the snow was melting. The aggressive, biting cold of February had softened into a muddy, hopeful slush. The town of Valentine's Verge was exhaling after the chaos of the festival season, stretching its limbs in the weak spring sun. Isley sat in the window of the written word, watching the rivulets of water run down the glass. The shop was different now. The Eleanor Swift collection, replica stationery based on the letters found in the archives, printed on heavy cream stock, had vanished from the shelves in 3 days. Tourists loved the story, the real story. They came in asking for the ink of sacrifice and the paper of secrets. Flynn had told it well, too well. Isley was on back order for the next month. Flynn had set up a studio in the back, renting a drafty corner from Rose. He called it the newsroom, which was generous considering it was a desk made of 2 sawhorses and an old door. He was recording his new podcast there, The Local Record. It wasn't about scandals. It was about, well, everything. He interviewed Rose about the metallurgy of horseshoes and the philosophy of fire. He interviewed Mrs. Gable about the history of her prize-winning hydrangeas and the correct way to fold a napkin. He was listening to everyone. He had kept his word. He hadn't pushed. He hadn't asked for forgiveness for the photo because the deletion of it had been his apology. He just showed up every day with coffee and ink stains on his cuffs. He helped Mrs. Gable carry her groceries. He helped Hallie reconcile the chocolate inventory. He was becoming part of the foundation. He was weaving himself into the tapestry of the town, not as a thread that pulled, but as one that held. Isley looked down at the paper on her desk. She had written 1,000 letters in her life. She had written thank you notes, condolence cards, love letters for other people to sign. She had been the ghostwriter for a whole town's emotions, but she had never written this one. She picked up her favorite pen, a dip pen with a nib that was slightly scratchy, just enough to give the lines some bite. Ink doesn't stutter. She took a deep breath. She dipped the pen. Dear Flynn. She watched the ink settle into the fibers of the paper. You asked me once why I hide in the shop. You said I was afraid of being seen. You were right. I was afraid that if I let people see the real history, the messy, complicated truth beneath the romance, they would stop loving this place. I was afraid that if I let you see me, really see me, you would find me boring compared to the stories you chase. But you didn't leave. You stayed when the story was over. You stayed when there was no headline. You stayed when the snow melted and the town looked muddy and real. You rewrote the history. You gave Eleanor her name back. You gave me my name back. I think it's time I gave you something back. I'm not hiding anymore, Flynn. And I'm tired of writing about love for other people. Meet me at the bridge, the one where the water meets the stone. Yours, Isley. She didn't sign it, the scribe. She didn't sign it, the heir. She waited for the ink to dry. She didn't blow on it. That was bad form. She watched it turn from a wet, glistening black to a permanent matte. She folded it. She slipped it into a cream envelope. She sealed it with red wax. She stood up. Hemingway, she said to the cat, who was asleep on a stack of invoices. I'm going out. Hemingway didn't care. He twitched an ear. Isley grabbed her coat, not the heavy winter one, but a lighter trench. She walked out of the shop, the bell chiming behind her. She walked across the slushy square to the hearth. She slipped the envelope under the door of Flynn's studio. Then she turned and walked toward the river. Her heart was hammering. It was louder than the bell, louder than the podcast. She was terrified, but she wasn't stuttering. Chapter 19. Flynn stared at the envelope on the floor. It had slid under the door with a soft swish while he was editing audio. It sat there on the rough wooden floorboards, looking out of place and perfect at the same time. It was cream-colored, heavy stock, red wax seal. His heart did a weird double thump. He knew that seal. He knew that paper. He knew the hand that had pressed it. He picked it up. His name was written on the front in a script so perfect it looked printed, but with a slight tremor in the F that betrayed the human behind the pen. Flynn. He broke the seal. The wax snapped. He unfolded the letter. He read it standing up. He read it sitting down. He read it pacing the 6-foot length of his office. I'm not hiding anymore. Flynn laughed. It was a breathless, joyful sound that bounced off the stone walls of the hearth. He grabbed his jacket. He didn't bother turning off his computer. He didn't bother locking the door. He ran. He ran out of the hearth, slipping on the muddy cobblestones. He ran past the statue of Elias Thorne, who looked a lot less smug now that his wife was the town hero. He ran past Mrs. Gable, who yelled something about running in the mud, but he didn't stop. He ran toward the river. The old stone bridge was at the edge of town, where the mill ruins stood. It was quiet there. The only sound was the rush of the meltwater over the rocks, a chaotic, happy roar of spring. She was standing in the middle of the bridge. She was wearing that oversized yellow cardigan he loved, wrapped tight against the March chill. She was looking at the water. She looked small against the vastness of the valley. But she didn't look fragile. She looked grounded, rooted. Flynn slowed down. He didn't want to spook her. He walked onto the bridge. His boots echoed on the stone. Isley turned. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. She looked terrified. "Hi," Flynn said, stopping a few feet away. He was out of breath. "Hi," Isley whispered. Flynn held up the letter. "I got your note." "It wasn't a note," she corrected, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. "It was a formal correspondence." "Right, formal." Flynn stepped closer. "And the instructions? Meet me where the water meets the stone?" It seemed poetic. It sounded like a riddle. I almost went to the fountain. Isley smiled. "You figured it out." "I always figure it out. Eventually. I'm an investigative reporter." He was close enough now to smell the lavender. Close enough to see the pulse jumping in her throat. "You said you're tired of writing about love for other people," Flynn said softly. "I am. It's exhausting. The adjectives alone." "Isley." She looked up at him. The humor faded from her eyes, replaced by a raw vulnerability that took his breath away. "I'm scared, Flynn," she admitted. "I don't know how to do this part. The part where it's not on paper. The part where I can't edit it." "It's easy," Flynn said. "You just be here. And if I mess it up, if I stutter, then I'll edit it in post," he promised. "I'll make you sound like a smooth jazz DJ." He reached out. He took her hand. Her fingers were cold. He warmed them in his. "You're the story, Isley," he said. "You were always the story. The best one I ever found." "You deleted the other story," she whispered. "The big one." "I deleted the noise," he corrected. "I kept the music." He leaned in slowly, giving her 1,000 chances to back away. She didn't. She leaned toward him. When he kissed her, it wasn't like the movies. There was no swelling orchestra. It was quiet. It was the sound of the river and the wind in the pines and the soft scratch of wool against leather. It tasted like coffee and winter air. It felt like ink sinking into paper. Permanent. Indelible. Isley made a small sound against his mouth and wrapped her arms around his neck. Flynn pulled her closer, lifting her off the cold stone, holding her like she was the only anchor in the world. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Isley rested her forehead against his chest. "Okay?" Flynn asked. "Okay," Isley said. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "Definitely okay to publish." Flynn laughed and kissed her again, right there in the open where anyone could see. The secrets were gone. The history was written. And for the first time, Isley Martin didn't mind being the headline. "Come on," Flynn said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "Let's go home. I need to show you my new microphone. You are such a nerd. Investigative nerd to you. They walked back toward the town, leaving the bridge behind. Some stories deserve to be written down, but some just deserve to be lived. Epilogue. Rose Calloway hated mud. It was ironic, considering she spent her life covered in soot and grease. But mud was different. Mud was chaotic. Mud didn't follow rules. Stupid, she muttered, trudging up the incline toward the old mine entrance. Her boots sucked loudly with every step. Stupid commission. Stupid artistic vision. Stupid... Noah. She kicked a rock. It skidded into the darkness of the mine shaft opening. She adjusted the headlamp on her forehead. The beam cut through the gloom. She shouldn't be here. The old mines were technically off limits. They were unstable, abandoned since the 1920s when the iron vein dried up. But she needed raw ore. Specifically, she needed local ore. The mayor, Noah, that infuriatingly perfect man with his pressed suits and his blinding smile, had commissioned a sculpture of unity for the town square to replace the fountain. He wanted it made from materials of the earth. Materials of the earth, Rose mocked, deepening her voice. Pretentious, distinct. She stepped into the mine. The air was cool and smelled of damp stone. She walked deeper, scanning the walls. She was looking for iron residue, anything she could smelt down. She saw a glint. "Hello," she whispered. She moved closer, pulling her pickaxe from her belt. The vein in the rock wasn't gray like iron. It was warm, reddish gold. Copper? She wondered. She swung the pick. Clang! A chunk of rock broke loose. She picked it up. It was heavy, heavier than copper. She shone her light on it. It glittered, not with the brazen shine of gold, but with a soft, blushing hue. Rose gold, she breathed. It was impossible. Rose gold was an alloy. You didn't find it in nature. Unless the specific mineral composition here, copper, gold, and whatever else was in this cursed mountain, had created a natural deposit. "This is illegal," a voice said. Rose screamed and dropped the rock. She spun around, blinding the intruder with her headlamp. "Jesus, Rose, turn that off!" Noah stood there, shielding his eyes. He was wearing a hard hat and a high-vis vest over his suit. He looked ridiculous and handsome. "Noah," she snapped. "What are you doing here, stalking me?" "I'm surveying," he said, lowering his hand as she angled the light down. "For the safety inspection, before we put the sculpture up. What are you doing here, besides trespassing?" "I'm finding your materials of the earth," she retorted. "And I found something better than iron." She picked up the rock and shoved it at his chest. "Look." Noah looked at the rock. He frowned. "It's pink." "It's rose gold, you uncultured bureaucrat. It's a natural vein. Do you know what this means?" "It means we're rich?" "It means," Rose said, her mind racing with the possibilities of alloys and melting points, "that this town is sitting on a fortune. And if the council finds out, they'll tear this mountain apart." Noah looked at the rock, then at her. "Then we don't tell them," he said. Rose blinked. "Excuse me? Mr. By the Book is suggesting a cover-up?" "I'm suggesting," Noah said, stepping closer, "that we protect the asset. If this gets out, Apex Corp won't just try to buy the land. They'll use eminent domain to seize it for mineral development. They'll condemn the forge." Rose felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mine. "They'd take my shop?" "They'd take everything," Noah said. "Unless we secure the heritage grant first. Unless we prove this land matters for history, not just profit. He looked at the rock in her hand, then at her. I need your help, Rose. And you need mine. We have to keep this quiet until the papers are signed. Rose looked at the rose gold in her hand, raw, jagged, and beautiful. She looked at the man she had been trying to ignore since kindergarten. She wiped her soot-stained palm on her jeans, then reached out and took his hand. Partners, she agreed. But if you snitch, I melt your stapler. Noah smiled, and for a second, the gloom of the mine felt brighter than the sun. Deal.
Thank you for listening. Please visit me at winvalentine.com to stay up to date. Please subscribe, leave a comment, and review.